There we go. So the recording for today's Be the Change workshop is going to be shared directly with participants who ask. So it'll be in a location that we will hold it available for those who specifically request for it. Participating in today's workshop can count as 4 hours of advanced training as a master naturalist. Please work with your local VMS admin to get that processed. And then there is a support Zoom link if you have Zoom issues today. All right, and I mentioned earlier, we have a very engaging agenda today and a lot of material that we want to cover in a very, what seems like a very long day, but a very short timeline with as much material and engagement as we're asking for today. So Michelle and I are going to share an opening. We've got a fantastic keynote speaker starting us off. Dr. Lopez is going to join us at 9:30. And then we'll go into some of our breakout work. Our break will be at 10:50 to grab that restroom, grab that extra cup of coffee or a little bit of water. And then some more engagement work at 11 with our final keynote, David Buggs, helping us to frame it all together at the very end of today's session at 12:30. So we're excited about our bookend keynotes from both of these gentlemen. All right.
So we mentioned earlier today, as we're getting started, that we intend for this workshop to be interactive. We have nearly 105 people. I guess we did have 105 people registered for this workshop today. So it's going to be a big one with hopefully lots of interaction among chapters and members from across the state. So thank you all for being here and being engaged and caring about this topic that's so important to us in our program. This is a working meeting, working interactive workshop. We expect and hope that everyone will stay involved throughout the day and participate in our open discussions and chat. All the conversation, as we mentioned earlier in some of our ground rules for an etiquette for the webinar, if you could, keep all conversation on topic and relevant to the program, the mission, and the scope. We recognize that there are probably going to be a lot of things that come up today, a lot of discussion, a lot of concepts and ideas or case studies that have happened. And though we'd love to fix world peace, there's probably not going to be, we probably are not going to be able to solve every problem for world peace online today. But we have a start, we hope. Today's event, you will be helping us create a living document that can be locally modified and adapted by your chapter and put into play with different pieces and parts that can be utilized by the certain scenarios and situation within your chapter. And you are a big part to further developing this playbook that we're calling it. Each chapter, we recognize that each chapter is in a different phase of their diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility discussions. And you may be coming from different places, have different goals and strategies and actions that fit your local scenario. So we're developing the document. You're developing the document along with us to address all those different places that we're coming from and working within. We will have a working program today. We will work through lunch, but we don't expect you to entirely work for lunch. We ask that you and welcome you to bring your lunch to wherever you're joining us from today. Bring your kind of brown bag style. We will be doing the same. We ask that you try to limit background interference or camera if you're eating, though it's happened before. And if we need to, just recognize that if we do find or hear background noise from participants that's kind of taking over the meeting, we will mute you from our end. So don't be alarmed, but that could happen. We'll have a break at 10:50 we'll have a 10-minute break from about 10:50 to 11, but please take breaks as needed, comfort breaks as needed. So we will be here and we are recording. So You'll be able to check back on things that you might missed if you really needed to take a break. Some of the ground rules today, Mary Pearl covered a couple of these already, but it is our intention to stay on time and on topic for today's agenda. We recognize that there's a lot to cover, and there will probably be a lot of discussion, comments, thoughts, history that we just can't get to with everyone. And so there may be times where you'll hear us say, we'd love to hear more about that, but we really do need to move on in order to keep on time. As a mechanism to help with kind of capturing those parking lot discussions or things that we need to come back to, we have developed a Google Doc for our what we're calling the parking lot Google Doc, or Google format. And you can place those questions, comments, or scenarios there, not in the chat box. And you can place them on the Google form for our state leadership team and the leadership team here to look at the conclusion of the workshop. Some questions we will need to discuss today is how we will come to consensus on our discussions. And that may be some things that when we're in breakout groups, your facilitators and groups kind of self-address or self-identify. Some ideas that we all need to think about is how will we listen and for how long today? And at what point do we put the topic that we probably need to close out and move on from on the form, the Google chat form in the parking lot. Again, just another reminder that like Mary Pearl said, though our workshop seems long today, it will go fast. So, and we do need to keep on topic. And as we mentioned, we will have times we'll have to say, this is great discussion, but we do need to move on. And so again, the parking lot is there to capture that so that we can come back to it another time.
Okay, so as Michelle mentioned, we're going to have a hopefully very interactive workshop today. And we have set up a Google folder with several documents in it to allow us to interact with each other and to have material that we're building together. These Google Docs are open and accessible to everyone who clicks on the link. I have shared that in the chat, and I'm going to run through and show you those briefly so that you guys can see that with me. Okay, so I'm going to bring this screen over. So this is our Be the Change workshop folder. You'll see that we have our agenda and ground rules. I've got them numbered in order to help you keep those organized. Again, these will be open and available for your review long after this workshop today. We have our starting Be the Change playbook that we're hoping that you will take back to your chapter, review, dive into, but then we're also going to be working and building more into that playbook today together throughout the breakout rooms. The parking lot that Michelle discussed is item number 2 on our workshop folder. I'm going to show you that parking lot right here. I've got them all open across the top of my screen here. That parking lot folder has either a form that you can leave anonymous comments, questions. You click on this link, it opens up in a new tab, and that form was a way that you can submit those comments, questions, notes, stories that you want to anonymously, or you can interactively add notes into this parking lot tab right here. So going back to the workshop folder, we also have 4 documents here on defining the DEIA terms, and we'll get into that in our breakout sessions starting at about 10 o'clock, and we'll talk through each of those. And then we have our 3 pillar documents: recruitment, retention, and outreach. And again, that's something that we'll go through together. Fear not, you do not have to navigate these if you are not comfortable navigating these, but we did want to show you that they are here and available for your interaction digitally if you'd like to as well. Each of our facilitators today has these open and ready, and will be taking notes and will be actively typing on them. So you can just watch and contribute verbally or in chat. But this is a way for those that don't want to verbally communicate or don't want to interact or have the ability or the want to type in some of these comments, can do that directly on these documents here. So we're going to drop that Google folder link into the chat a few times throughout the day just to keep it available. But if you haven't already, go ahead and open that so that you've got it available on your computer. I'm going to drag it back over to my other screen so that I can toggle between the two. But again, that Google folder will be available for quite a long time after today's workshop. We may move it to a slightly different location after a while, but we'll let everybody who's registered and everybody who's interacted with it know, at least for the next couple of months, that's where it's going to sit. And again, they're numbered so that you can find them easily in order for how we're going to engage with them today on today's workshop. If you have any questions on the Google Docs, please feel free to ask that in the chat so that we can answer that. One note that Michelle made in chat today is that playbook. If you click it, please make sure that you open it as a PDF. One thing that I dislike about Google is that if you open that PDF, sometimes it'll ask you if you want to convert it to a document. If you do, the formatting will go crazy and it's highly illegible. But we have it there as a PDF so that you can download it, open it as a PDF and read it there. Okay, taking that back over here.
And then the other thing, just to ensure, just another reminder to make sure that you do open that as a PDF. Otherwise, if it converts, it makes several different copies of the document. So just to ensure that we're all looking at the same thing, please open it up as a PDF.
Exactly. Okay, so that's how we're going to interact today. We will post the Google folder link throughout the day so that you can reference that as you need to. Thank you, Michelle. Okay, we're also going to use breakout rooms today. These breakout rooms will automatically show up on your Zoom screen. We're going to randomly assign you to these 4 breakout rooms that we're going to discuss, and we'll cover this one more time as we get closer to the breakout room use at about 10 o'clock. But again, we want to make sure that you're familiar with that technology. We'll walk through it one more time before we automatically assign you to these breakout rooms. If you haven't experienced breakout rooms before, it's a really great way to take all 67 people that are here in today's workshop so far, put them into these 4 kind of smaller work groups, like I'm sending you to a working table over here and one group to a table over here, another one over here, and you can unmute, interact with these smaller groups, help to have those key facilitated discussions as we're defining some of these common language terms that we're going to be using today. We will have a facilitator in each room. Fear not. If you do not feel comfortable opening that Google Doc, that facilitator will be there opening that Google Doc and manipulating it, taking notes there as well. And then again, everybody has access to those Google Docs simultaneously, so you can interact in that way, or you can unmute and interact verbally. Okay, here we go.
Okay, so a little bit of history about behind this Be the Change workshop. Our Master Naturalist chapters and our state program has been working on Be the Change efforts, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, and even accessibility efforts in different ways and in different times throughout the history of the Master Naturalist program. However, over the past couple of years, especially during the kind of the things that we saw with social unrest and the interaction with Christian Cooper, who you see on the right-hand side of the screen there in a park in New York, really brought the idea of Be the Change and diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility to the forefront of our minds. And this was all happening through the pandemic. So even the pandemic itself was bringing all of these topics to the forefront and to the top again. For myself, I had been watching my home state of Michigan, where I grew up not too far from Flint, Michigan, and even as far back as 2014, 2016, kind of looking at what was happening in Flint, Michigan with environmental injustice and justice issues there with the Flint, Michigan water crisis, and thinking, gosh, what, just think of the things a Master Naturalist program could do in places like Flint, Michigan at that time, and helping to make better or uncover some of these environmental and social justice issues related to our program. So really our history with kind of the Be the Change efforts and ideas and thoughts started way before 2020 to 2022. And like I mentioned, with the history of the pandemic and the events that took place there, it really brought everything to the forefront of our minds. And we recognize, and as many of you do too, that our Master Naturalist chapters are typically homogeneous in their local areas. And we wanted to make that better. We were hearing from our chapters and chapter leaders and advisors at the local level and within the leadership of our program. What can we do at our local level, and what can our program do? And so this really was the impetus to our Be the Change efforts over the past year with the program. In March of 2021, all my years are running, the 20s, the 2021 through 2022 are all running together now. But in March of 2021, we launched into the Be the Change efforts that really gave us the focus and like monthly focus and around this effort, giving more energy specifically and solely to this topic over the past year. You want to forward to the next slide. So last year, we started our Be the Change efforts with this Be the Change. And it began as a mini webinar series dedicated to exploring diversity, equity, inclusion, and really at that time, at the advent of the Be the Change webinar series, mini series, we added accessibility to that, and in how we as Master Naturalists and our chapters in our conservation communities can address change and be the change or lead the change in our local communities and through our program statewide. Just as a natural world thrives on biodiversity, so does the Master Naturalist program. So we set out to launch the Be the Change effort to engage all audiences and all conservation organizations in this effort. I mentioned one of the goals was the mini-series of the event to continue either start or continue conversations that have been happening regarding the DEIA topics with at the chapter level, at the state level, and within our local community, conservation communities, with Master Naturalist members and abroad. And one of the things that we promised through the Be the Change effort last year when we launched this was that the whole mini series would culminate in a workshop event. So that is what we're doing here today. This is the capstone to the whole webinar mini series, the Be the Change effort. And our hope is that through your work and help with us today, that we will have this playbook that can be adapted and updated and usable by your local chapters for years to come. So we mentioned the playbook result of the webinar series was a large result of the webinar series was our playbook, which we've already started developing. It's has been in the process since March of last year. Could move on to the next slide. We developed it as a strategic guide for Master Naturalist chapters Not something that is a prescription, but it has pieces and parts that a chapter can pick up depending on a topic or an issue or a scenario that has come up or that you want to tackle. And there's resources in there for different items, pieces, and parts. These were all developed as each of our webinar series was presented. This is in all the items and resources in the Be the Change playbook was developed with our presenters who presented on each of those topics throughout the series. Speakers shared discussion questions and action items for chapters and members to consider. These items are already in this playbook and we'll be contributing more to it today.
Yeah, so it's okay. So in the Be the Change mini series, and I've dropped the link in to the chat. It's worth rewatching if you haven't watched them. They were all recorded throughout the year. Last year we had I'm not going to count that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different webinars last year with some fantastic speakers from across the state and across the country. Starting off with Birdability and then with our capstone or our keynote speaker at the October annual meeting. Those webinar series are still available on the website. Those recordings throughout 2021, we had just shy of 3,000 folks watch those live. And I haven't updated that recording number recently, but about half of that 3,000 has watched it as recordings as well. So the longevity of those webinar series is strong, and again, something to definitely refer back to and rewatch as you go through. Michelle, you want to talk about our first one that kicked us off?
Yeah, our first session, it was just so eloquent and beautiful the way it all came together. Birdability, a new organization that had started in Texas, Birdability. And this was a topic that was brought to us by one of our chapters and advisors within the program. And Freya McGregor, her history with the Master Naturalist program, like the whole event was just so perfect for the start of our webinar series. Freya is a Master Naturalist herself. She's a transplant from Australia. She trained within our Alamo area chapter. And since she's been in the States, she's gotten married and kind of moved around with her husband, but now works for this Birdability organization, which talks about accessibility. And their whole premise for Birdability and the presentation they gave that day is around birding, and that birding is for everybody and everybody. And how can we think about accessibility for those with difficulties, mobility difficulties, or other issues that they're dealing with, and how can we make that accessible to all? So Freya's marriage of the topic area and being a Master Naturalist was just perfect for the launch of this event. It was a crossover event into our Be the Change webinar series from our TMN Tuesday series. And some of the kind of the notable quotes from Freya's Birdability presentation was, "You never know what is going to happen when or until you include someone." These are all great quotes to think about and prep for today and our work that we have coming up today. Another topic, 1 in 4 Americans has a disability. Some of them visible, most of them are invisible. When you include everyone benefits. It's not enough to just think you're being inclusive. You have to intentionally be inclusive. And there's no wrong way to enjoy birds and nature.
Yeah, so Freya helped kick off the webinar series, and then we had the mini series continued in April with David Buggs. All of these great quotes and references that are made on the slides. I'm not going to read all of them today just to save time, as we've got a few more minutes until we kick off with our opening keynote by Dr. Lopez. But these are all available on our Be the Change website. We actually have pulled these quotes out on that Be the Change website for quick reference as well. Some of the kind of hot comments and notes and things that were said by our speakers throughout the webinar series. So David gave our April presentation on the end of outreach, recognizing unmet conservation audiences. He talked about being comfortable being comfortable being in a position where you're not in control, or being comfortable in a position where you're not comfortable. That's where those difficult conversations happen and thrive. Our May Be the Change speaker was Alex Bailey with Black Outside, located out of the San Antonio area as well. He spoke on From Awareness to Allyship, an intro into the Black Outside, incorporation, and engaging BIPOC communities. Alex provided some fantastic questions to ask back to yourself about engaging BIPOC communities and the storytelling behind that, and ways that our master naturalists engage BIPOC communities in their natural resource and conservation educational engagement programs. So again, a lot of these are on our website. All of these are on our website, and I encourage you to read them. For the sake of time, I'm going to keep going, Michelle. Our June speaker was Judge Ronnie McDonald, former judge in Bastrop County. He talked about relationships and circles of relationships. One of my personal favorites in the mini series, a fantastic oral presentation that day. July, Michelle and I gave a chapter panel discussion. We highlighted some of the work that our Master Naturalist chapters were actively engaging in DE&I. And we did a poll to understand where each of our chapters were, and highlighted some of the activities that our chapters were already engaging in. Javier de Leon, a chapter advisor in the Rio Grande Valley, gave our August Be the Change seminar, Bridging the Gap, Getting New Audiences Outdoor in the Rio Grande Valley. And again, I apologize for going fast, but I'm trying to keep us on time. Our September Be the Change was Kelly Simone, Sam Kieschnick, and Tony Hennihan, a fantastic team of urban biologists with Texas Parks and Wildlife from across the state, talking about their program, Making Friends and Influencing People for Conservation. Seriously worth a rewatch, as they talked about all of their different engagement opportunities and questions that they were asking as they were engaging in those communities. And then our keynote speaker at our annual meeting, Dr. Drew Lanham, gave our October Be the Change, Coloring the Conservation Conversation. You have to say that slowly, but it was a honestly just an incredible presentation where he told from his backyard. I forget what he calls his shed, but just a fantastic oral story that he told us, very visual in the way that he delivers his message as well. So just setting it up for Dr. Lopez, our opening speaker. Y'all are well aware of our program history, our mission to develop a corps of well-trained volunteers to provide education, service, and outreach across the state of Texas. Again, that mission stays at the core of everything that we do, but we also hold these three core values, education, outreach, and service, as the pillars that provide the structure for our program. So all of this to say, Michelle, do you want to lead it off?
Yeah, so there's just one thing that I wanted to note about this slide too, is that in preparation for this workshop, we did survey all of our chapters, and I mean, hopefully it comes as no surprise to you that even our chapters not being presented in this format of our mission, our chapters said we need more information or more strategies on how to increase diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility wrapped around these core values: education, outreach, and service. So your input from your chapters really framed our how we are tackling this workshop and moving forward with this workshop today. in just the happiest of, I don't know if it's accidents or by design or just everybody thinking of our mission. It's these three words are front and center in our mission already. So kudos, congratulations, and great job on already keeping your efforts and ideas within the mission of the program.
Okay, and then leading us off to talk about trends in conservation diversity and kind of setting the stage of why this is important and what the nexus is for diversity in the state of Texas. Our opening speaker, Dr. Roel Lopez, is currently the department head for the Rangeland Wildlife and Fisheries Management Department at Texas A&M University. He's also the director of the Texas Natural Resources Institute. And I'm going to let Dr. Lopez introduce his presentation, and you should have screen sharing ability now.
Let's first make sure you can hear me.
Yes, sir.
All right, so I will, you would think after 2 years that we would be good at this, right? So let me bring this up, share screen. Oh. Can you see?
We can see it.
All right. So as Mary Pearl said, thanks for the introduction and thanks for in the invitation to be here this morning. My topic is going to do three things: talk about land stewardship, kind of what's happening in our state, and how the engagement of disengaged communities is important. And we'll round that out with a short discussion on world peace. That was a joke. I was hoping to get Mary Pearl to react to that, but
That's awesome. Thank you for solving that for us.
I chuckled. Thank you, Laura.
I will tie those first two topics with world peace at the end. So really my charge this morning is to do two things. The first is what's happening in our state, and many of us see this, and I'll go through some maps and data to kind of give you a quantitative perspective of what's kind of occurring, what the drivers are, and so forth. And more importantly, then pivot to the last couple of slides that looks at why it matters. Why should we, as an organization with Texas Master Naturalist, as conservationists, really care, and how can we make a difference in this broader engagement? So let me start out with setting the stage. Texas is comprised of 171 million acres. You always hear the statistic, 95% of Texas is privately owned. That's correct. The statistic I like using, though, is 83% of Texas is a farm, a ranch, a family forest. 83% of Texas is open space. And this open space, this 141 million acres that are privately owned, benefits 30 million Texans that depend on the natural resources and broader goods and services that are derived from these rural working lands. When you look at the state, the bulk of the state is in urban or suburban areas. About 9–10% is in these rural communities, and about 1% of Texans, about 250,000 landowners, own and steward 83% of these rural open space lands. And that's important because if we're going to have an impact from a conservation perspective, obviously engaging with, working with private landowners is a real important piece of that. So what's happening in our state, again, is we've got 1,200 people moving to our state every day. And another statistic I like giving is we lose a square mile of working lands every day. A section of land, about 640 acres. So by the end of today's workshop, we would have lost a farm or ranch, the average size of a farm or ranch. That, coupled with the fact that our landowners are approaching retirement age, where many of them are trying to determine what's the next step in terms of maintaining. And one thing that we're seeing is the largest intergenerational transfer of rural land in the next 10 years, impacting about 56 million acres. So again, a pretty sizable set of drivers that's going to impact how we look at the conservation of working lands. And one of the things that I like telling people, what are the drivers? It typically starts with a strong economy, an increase in population growth, an increase in demands for this open space. Everyone wants a piece of Texas, right? An increase in the land values. We're seeing that across the state, most certainly in and around these urban centers. It's pretty mind-boggling, to be quite honest. And that higher demand and higher value creates an incentive to subdivide or sell, ultimately either fragmenting, breaking up that larger farmer ranch into a smaller set of pieces, if you will, subdividing it, and or conversion. And so that's the process that we've seen in the last 20 years in Texas, and we're seeing that only continue moving forward, and in fact, in some cases, is accelerating. So what are the consequences? What's the consequences of losing a farm or ranch? You know, obviously there's a loss of food, fiber, water supplies. You know, there's 20,000 steak dinners that will no longer be produced annually because we lost that section of land today. 10,000 blue jeans, you know, not being made, and 91 water towers not being filled over an annual basis. So every day we lose a section of land, and that the consequences of that on an annual basis is pretty significant, just using food, fiber, and water as examples here. So our challenges as a state is this, you know, obviously we have more people. The projections I'll show you here in a minute is we're going to increase the number of people, diverse and emerging stakeholders. There's changes in our land base, landowner demographics, and competing interests. So I want to go through these three primary challenges from a land conservation, open space stewardship perspective, and then round out with some thoughts for the Texas Master Naturalist to think about as you go through your workshop exercise today. So 3 takeaways here: greater numbers. You know, we're sitting at about 30 million. That's going to nearly double by 2050, about 55, 60 million. These were a little older projections with the shifts in Tesla and some of the bigger businesses moving to Texas. That could in fact be higher. We're seeing shifts in demographics. Here we see pretty significant shifts in the Hispanic population, for example. We're going to see shifts and continued shifts in urban versus rural Texas. And I hate to pitch it as urban versus rural, but the reality is it's hard to understand, appreciate, and so forth, open space if you're not tied to it, right? And so that's another challenge that we're beginning to see as we move forward. In looking at the land trends data, so the Institute has been involved in understanding the land demography, if you will, of Texas for the last 20 or so years. In the last 20 years, we've seen a 48% increase in the population. Not surprising, most of that is tied to these urban centers. They call this the Texas Triangle. And so Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio, Houston is an area that's experiencing sizable growth. In fact, Texas has the dubious honor of having 7 of the 15 most rapidly growing cities in the nation, and those are listed there. And so again, not surprising that we're seeing this, but again, it's only going to accelerate and make it much more difficult for us to conserve or steward open space. So more people, greater demand, obviously it results in fragmentation and conversion. Couple that with the fact that our landowners have perhaps different goals and objectives, some of our newer landowners. This kind of shows you one of those fastest growing cities in McKinney in 1981 versus 2017. And you can see, going from open space to basically subdivisions. Again, this is what we're seeing across the state. These type of signs are becoming more commonplace, unfortunately. So the hotter the color, that's where we're seeing the greater amount of change. An early predictor of land conversion, land fragmentation is market value. So in looking at the last 20 years, we've seen an increase on average of $1,500 per acre. And in many of these areas, it's much more significant. Here in Bryan College Station, for example, an acre of land is running about $40,000 an acre. Similar in Bear County, Travis County, and so forth. But on average, statewide, we've seen about a 30% increase. And so where you see that increase in demand for land, it results in fragmentation, meaning the breakup of that farm and ranch. In the last 20 years, we've seen fragmentation, not surprisingly, in and around these urban centers. So we've added about between 20 to 25,000 new farms and ranch operations in the last 20 years. That's only going to continue to accelerate moving forward. And having smaller acreage landowner makes it challenging for doing certain practices, for example, like grazing or prescribed fire. And so those are some of the things that we're going to have to kind of work through. So with that sort of gives you the background to what's happening, right? This is what we're seeing in the state with regards to more people, increased demand on lands, changes in landowner demographics, and what the implications of all those things are. Now, what I'd like to do is sort of pivot to the topic at hand. Why does it matter? Why should we as conservationists care about this? Oh, I got a slide out of. I'm sorry. I got a slide out of whack here. I hadn't finished, so let me continue. So working land conversion, again, we've lost about 2 million acres. The last crop to be planted in Texas is asphalt, is what I like telling people. So again, this is kind of the end game. This slide kind of shows you the number of new wells in the last 20 years. Again, this is a significant amount of pressure or draw, if you will, on our natural resources, in this case, obviously water. The other piece, as I mentioned, is changes in landowner demographic. So the average landowner in Texas is about 65 years of age. And as I mentioned earlier, we're about to see the largest intergenerational transfer of rural lands in our history. It's happening now. And the impacts of that are monumental. One thing that I like to think about when I think about open space is land is infrastructure. Remember that land is infrastructure. So we oftentimes think of water lines and roads and buildings and so forth as infrastructure, all important aspects of communities, right? But land, especially in rural communities, by definition, is a key component of land or of the infrastructure formula. And so the future landowner for Texas is changing. They have different goals and objectives. They're less tied to the land. Absentee ownership is about 40%. New ownership is about a quarter, 25%. And so again, this sort of adds to our challenge in trying to sustain the stewardship of these open lands, of these farms, ranches, family forests. One thing that we did here recently, and in fact, going through the process now of our landowner survey, as well as our water survey, which by the way is scheduled to close here next week. So we'll be sending out a reminder to folks that haven't had a chance to fill that out. For those that did, we appreciate that because it gives us information like this. One question that we asked is, why do you own land? And what's interesting is the majority of responses aren't kind of the traditional type of uses, with the exception of ranching. Hunting, wildlife, family, recreation are actually the top uses in terms of responses from our landowner survey. So I want to take a step back and, we I think at this point understand the changes in land conversion, land fragmentation, and so forth. The other aspect to this first part of my message to you is competing interests. When a recent survey of Texans was, what are the top issues that's on your mind? Immigration, healthcare, education, all pretty important topics, right? But that's part of our challenge. If you've got a primarily urban population, and then you have these things to sort of compete against, immigration, healthcare, education, for example, it's going to make the work that we do much harder, right? And so we have to find a way to be at the table, to be part of those conversations, to engage communities that historically perhaps haven't been engaged. And so being able to tie our conservation efforts to these other similar interests and so forth, I think is important. Healthcare is a good one, right? Open space has been shown to have some benefits in terms of healthcare. We saw that during COVID. There was a mass effort for people to get outdoors and so forth because of the issues tied to the pandemic. So here's a slide that I was looking for. I put one in the wrong place. So that's kind of what's happening, as I mentioned, in terms of changes in land and landowners and what those impacts are. Now I want to pivot, hopefully, to the right slide on why it matters. And in my mind, why diversity is important from a stewardship perspective has to do with this idea that diversity, in essence, equals support for conservation. And so if you want to look at it just simply from an economic perspective, whether it's bird watching, political support, participation in environmental organizations, resource conservation, professional societies, consumptive users, et cetera, all that serves to benefit the stewardship of natural resources. A phrase that I've used often is this idea that participation equals conservation. So what we're trying to do and why diversity matters from my perspective is this: if we can increase the amount of communities that aren't currently at the table, that aren't part of our conversation, we're not going to be as effective as we could be. And that's why I think this idea and this move to really emphasize diversity in organizations like Texas Master Naturalists is so important. It's just going to make us more effective in terms of the work that we do, because there are a sizable number of disengaged communities. And so how can we not only diversify our membership, but diversify those that participate in our programs and so forth, because ultimately they can serve to benefit and ensure continued support of those programs moving forward. Look at it from an economic perspective. At least that's the way I like to look at it is, we're finding that our voice is getting smaller and smaller, but there's an opportunity for us to amplify our voice through this increased engagement. So from a Texas Master Naturalist perspective, there's a couple of things that kind of come to my mind. I think the majority of new conservation efforts will continue to obviously involve voluntary partnerships with landowners and communities. But I do think that looking at how we do our kind of traditional approaches in a non-traditional way is important. Conserving land, we have to transition from just conserving land to engaging communities and connecting people to nature. And it's interesting that we've seen these trends in things like land trusts. Land trusts don't just do conservation easements. Now they're doing other types of activities and so forth that really just engage, and I use the term disengaged communities. Let's call it for what it is. The majority of Texans aren't involved or see the value of open space. And so in order for us to change that narrative, we need to work to try to better engage and connect those values, those goods and services to things like healthcare or health benefits, right? And so if I'm trying to preserve or conserve rather, farm ranch land outside of San Antonio, I live in San Antonio, I need to be able to understand that the source of my water is tied to those farms and ranches, right? And so until we start having that conversation, I think it's going to be very challenging for our organizations to really better engage in these communities and so forth. So that last bullet there is, in my opinion, Texas Master Naturalists will measure success by the ways in which the community is engaged and the number of people served. And so I think that's part of the rationale for today's workshop is how can we basically increase our customer client base? So the common ground is how do we engage a broader audience? Moving toward greater community engagement, connecting human health and well-being, for example, is one approach. And I think the Master Naturalist's mission is well suited to try to achieve that as we move forward. So my final slide here before I turn it over for questions or comments is this. We need to go beyond the business as usual and have intentional and deliberate engagement strategies. Intentional and deliberate engagement strategies. What do I mean by that? If our goal is to increase the number of Hispanics, the majority of Texans are Hispanic, of Hispanic descent. And when you look at the Master Naturalist membership, that's the percent, right? So there's some work to do there. And African American community, others, again, we're trying to diversify the base to get broader support for conservation. Participation equals conservation, right? And so having strategies, programs that are intentional with that goal in mind, I think is part of the solution. There's two quotes that I have there. There is an urgency of doing, and it needs to happen now. And it's been different. I'll be honest. I've been in this business for the last 20 to 25 years, and the shift and focus is very different than it was 15, 20 years ago. So it's an opportunity that we can pursue. And the other quote that I oftentimes use is, why it matters. It's not necessary to change. Survival is not mandatory. And what I mean by that is organizations, agencies, and so forth, we really need to make an effort to try to facilitate this business, no longer business as usual, to have these intentional strategies to broaden our engagement. So with that, I will stop there. And all this, Mary Pearl, is important in terms of world peace.
It is, absolutely.
So I'll leave it at that.
If you're not engaged, what was the quote?
Yeah.
If you're not in the conversation, you're on the menu.
Yeah, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. That's very true. And so, and I think we see that, going back to the statistic of land stewardship, I think many of our landowner advocacy groups are recognizing that, man, when almost 90% of Texans live in an urban center, they may not be landowners and so forth. We need to start to do a better job in explaining the value of that open space, whether you live in San Antonio or Austin, Dallas, et cetera. There's value to that. We benefit from that. And so the sooner we do that, the more important and relevant our work's gonna be. So
absolutely. There's a few questions that we have in the chat. The first that was asked early on in your presentation when you were going through the Texas Land Trends data, and I did drop the link for Texas Land Trends in the chat so folks can reference that, and those surveys that you mentioned are also linked on that website. But Tim asked, how does Texas's laws regarding mineral rights impact the ability of surface landowners' ability to adopt conservation stewardship? Or are there any reforms on the horizon?
That's a topic that always comes up, and I think it's something that's certainly being looked at, but it's a very challenging thing to do because they are separated. For those that may not know, you as a property owner own the surface rights, but what's under you could be owned by you. Typically, it's not, and the ability for people to explore minerals, drill and so forth is pretty significant. So it is a challenge. I think part of the issue there is trying to engage with those developers early in the process and working with solutions to either offset those impacts or move to a different area. That's happened to me personally. I've got property in South Texas, and they put some injection wells, sizable injection wells, and I was able to push that off, but it was my cousin. It was all family property that's been broken up, so I'm contributing to the fragmentation piece, and that's the other piece that happens, right? And so that's a great question, but there's always discussions regarding that, Mary Pearl. But the reality is that that's also a very strong group that has a pretty loud voice. I do want to highlight Blanca Reina's comment, and I love that comment. Disengaged communities is the term I use, but really, I don't say that in a negative way. I see it as an opportunity. And so being able to sort of tap into those potential opportunities and expand our voice and the work that we do, I think is something that Texas Master Naturalist is well positioned to do.
Thank you. Yeah, I love the symbolism behind her comment as well. I think that works well to explain it for master naturalists. We have time for a few more questions. There are requests for your slides, Dr. Lopez. I know a lot of that data is available on the Texas Land Trends website as well.
Yeah, if you go to just Google Texas Land Trends, this slideshow or the bulk of it is there. And if there's a specific slide you're looking for, I'd be happy to share the presentation.
Excellent. All
Thoughts,
right.
reactions? Does it make sense to people on why it's important? It's different, folks. I'm doing some work with several partners in the Hill Country, tidal water equity and so forth. I've been pleasantly surprised at the conversations. Really, it's a very different conversation than has happened in the past. And so I think it's an opportunity for us to try to address it.
Absolutely. Any other comments or questions for Dr. Lopez? I've heard his presentation multiple times, and it is it is both scary and exciting all at the same time. The opportunities and the potential that lie ahead to engage new landowners and conservation is exciting, although it's quite daunting, and that's what we have our master naturalists trained and poised and ready to engage these communities of new landowners, new conservationists across the state.
I'd like to thank folks in the chat and just everyone's attention. So appreciate the work that you do. I'm a big fan of Texas Master Naturalist, and so you're certainly a force to be reckoned with. So get to work. We got lots to do.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Dr. Lopez. We appreciate it. And again, his resources and materials are on that website. And then we'll have this recording available if y'all want to listen to his presentation again. So I'm going to reshare my screen.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm going to head to another meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
All right, I'm sharing my screen again and going to move over here so that I've got it all set. All right, so we are right on time. So again, the agenda is going to stay quick and fast today, but we'll have the recording available so that you can go back and review it, and then we'll have these notes available for review on that Google folder as well. So our next section, we're going to talk about setting common goals, values, and language. And here the question is, what's the big idea, or why does diversity matter, as Dr. Lopez put. But before we get into the why, we want to make sure that we're using common language and common values for the Master Naturalist program as we define these terms that we're using. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, DEIA. And so we'll use it in that acronym DEIA throughout, but there is no preset order for those letters or those words as they occur. DEIA just seems to roll off my tongue a little bit faster. So again, there's no perception of order here. It's just the way that, that they were put together. So over the last year, we have collected definitions of diversities of the diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility from our state agencies that sponsor the Master Naturalist program, from different partner conservation organizations, and then also from you, our Texas Master Naturalist chapters. We hosted 2 surveys over the last year, asking you how you and your chapter, both personally and then yourself as a chapter, have defined some of these words. And we have a variety of different definitions and things that have been presented in those surveys as well. But our goal in this next section of our workshop here is this is the really heavy engagement part, is to set a common language that will be used by the program going forward. We're going to create these concise common definitions of the 4 words DEIA. And to do that, we're going to use our breakout rooms. We're going to use our Google Docs, and we're going to let you guys go to these breakout rooms here in just a second. So again, I'm going to show you each of these docs, and I'm going to show you these breakout rooms before we go there. But at 10:10, we're going to move you all to these 4 breakout rooms, and I'm going to randomly assign you to these 4 breakout rooms. Each group will clean up the definitions that were previously presented. And by clean up, I don't mean delete or remove. I mean synergize them, bring them to some kind of clear and concise wording for defining each of these words. These will help to define those final definitions. If there's any sort of final, again, I'm going to use the word cleanup, but wordsmithing and making the formatting nice and pretty, we'll do that at the state level and then present them back to y'all after the breakout groups have reconvened. So the hope here is that we are going to come out with those common language and definitions for each of those terms. In those breakout rooms, I'm going to drag over my screen now. In those breakout rooms, we're going to then drop the link for one of these 4 Google Docs here. I'm going to run through them real fast, starting with number 3, defining diversity. And you'll see in each of these 4 Google Docs, we have some preset definitions that were provided either by agencies or from our members. And these are here. We have some graphics as well that you may want to consider in your definition work. And then at the bottom of the page, we have a working definition where you as a small group will bring that concise definition together. Inclusion, same thing. We have some graphics. We have some from our member quotes, some things that have come from different websites, agencies, partners. Some more here on accessibility. I am going to drop these links in the chat here in just a second so that you can see this, but I wanted you to be familiar with what these documents look like before you get thrown into them. Again, our facilitators are going to be managing these. You do not have to take notes if you don't want to take notes on these. Our facilitators will be doing that here shortly. And then equity as well. Move this back over here. Each group will select a spokesperson to present their definition as a whole group, and we'll reconvene at 10:30. We're asking that that spokesperson not be the facilitator. We want it to be a master naturalist. We want it to be one of y'all. Again, we're here so that we can engage and interact with all of our membership here today. So while I am setting up the breakout rooms, Michelle, if you'll just read some of these starting points on these definitions, and I'm going to get all of this stuff started.
Sure. So defining diversity, as Mary Pearl mentioned, one of the things that we did, and we mentioned earlier, one of the things that we did when we were preparing for this workshop is we surveyed our chapters again. And so the words that you see on the screen here are actually the starting points for some of their own definitions of diversity. And this is as a result of a couple different surveys over the past year with our chapters. So defining diversity in our own terms thus far. Diversity includes unique dimensions of physical attributes that can be seen, as well as other attributes that cannot be seen. There is a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee made up of employees and leaders like David Buds at Texas Parks and Wildlife. And this is a definition that that group has begun with us, begun for us, and that we're kind of sharing with you here today. The other diversity definitions that we have from our chapters and our members is diversity is layers of differences that make each person unique from more obvious ones like gender, ethnicity, age, race, and to less visible ones like education or cultural background. Another definition of diversity from one of our chapters and members is diversity is the natural result of cross-pollination of ideas, perspectives, and cultures. It extends and supports collaboration, knowledge sharing, and creates community belonging. Different, varied, mixed, not the same. And then lastly, another item from our members that we heard in chapters, their definition of diversity means understanding that everyone is unique in recognizing their individual differences. These differences can be along the dimensions of age, gender, ethnicity, religion, disability, sexual orientation, or other differences. Diversity is more than tolerating differences. It is a set of conscious practices that involve understanding and appreciating the interdependence of humanity, cultures, and the natural environment in forging alliances across diversity so that we can work together to diminish all forms of discrimination. So these were some really great definitions of diversity that has come from within, from our members and our chapters. On the screen now is another, I guess, visual of diversity. And diversity really, there was one quote in the previous slide that talked about layers. And so this slide and this graphic here really kind of drives home, at least to me, the idea that diversity is layers. We have a primary layer where we talk about age, gender, ethnicity, race, and physical qualities. A secondary layer to diversity is work background, religion, education, culture, political ideology, personality types, thought process, all of those things that you see in that blue circle in the center as the secondary layer to diversity. And then finally, another layer in diversity is what Parks and Wildlife defines as the tertiary layer, or the third layer, and things that like work location for a chapter, that might be your chapter location, customer or service interface, your outreach, organizational, functional level, to put that in terms of a chapter or a member, like what is your membership level within the program, or do you play a leadership role within your chapter? Similarly to kind of grade level in the organization. Are you a master naturalist starting out, just starting training with us? Are you certified, or have you been a master naturalist for several years and certified within the organization for several years? Are you in a region or district? Geography, rural versus urban. We have, and to put that into like a chapter perspective, we have several chapters that are very urban and encompassing urban areas, and then chapters that are in rural areas.
Okay, so I'm gonna move through the last couple of slides pretty quickly here so that y'all can see each of these definitions that we've started with, as I mentioned, are in the Google Docs. We have equity and from our members, inclusion as well, and then accessibility. And I am going to open those breakout rooms now and move you in there. I'm going to join the equity room here in just a second. Our facilitator in the defining diversity room is going to be Kelly Simone. In defining inclusion is going to be David Buggs. And then in defining accessibility is going to be Michelle Haggerty. So I'm going to move those now, and you will have 20 minutes. At 1 minute till, it will bring you back to the main room. So here we go. All right. Hi, guys.
Wow.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, welcome. I'm going to share my screen again, and we are in the defining equity room. So I'm going to bring that one over. Can y'all see my screen?
Yes.
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 I'm going to grab that link and drop it in the chat. All right. If somebody wants to give us some reading and read some of the stuff that we've got already, and then we'll work together to go from there. Robert or Sue, y'all are unmuted and on video. Do one of y'all want to read the first definition?
Sure, I'll take it. Equity, the quality of being fair and impartial. The term equity refers to fairness, justice, and is distinguished from equality. Whereas equality means providing the same to all, equity means recognizes that we do not all start from the same place and must acknowledge and make adjustments to imbalances. The process is ongoing, requiring us to identify and overcome intentional and unintentional barriers arising from bias or systematic structures.
Awesome, thank you. And so the graphic that's on the screen is one that's one of my favorite to help define equality versus equity. In the first image, it's assumed that everyone will benefit from the same support, where they are being treated equally. In the second image, it shows individuals are given different supports to make it possible for them to have equal access, and they're being treated equitably. But then in the third image, it shows that all three can see the game without any supports or accommodations because the cause of inequity was addressed. Systematic barrier has been removed there. Some of the things that we've seen from our members: diversity encompasses a wide range of people with differences arising from ethnicity, age, gender, sexual orientation, disability, religion, and other differences. Diversity is the mix. Inclusion makes sure that there is a place at the table for everyone. And this member defined equity is offering everyone equal opportunity to grow, learn, and serve in the community or in the organization. Okay, so what I'd like to see if we can do is wordsmith, come up with a common language starting point, how you define equity, and how we as a program move forward to define equity.
I think equity is ability to be able to recognize everyone's needs and not come up with a simple single solution, but there may be many to make everything fair to everyone else that's involved. And to me, when you do that, it keeps everyone interested in projects and other things that we are doing.
Zoom in on this. Woo, not that one. Sorry, y'all. I'm gonna zoom in. Can y'all see that?
Uh-huh.
Okay, does anybody else want to add to that?
I don't think there's a way to talk about equity without talking about accessibility, which I know is the whole theme of this workshop.
Okay. And excuse all of my typos. Hard spelling things when you're typing fast. Okay.
I really like what it had said about not all of us start from the same place. I don't know if that was it was mentioned in your definition above, but I really like that. We don't all start from the same place. But I also really love the third little graphic with the chain link fence. I just think that's really a good explanation for that. And I apologize, I can't get my camera to work, and I can only get it to work, I think, by turning off my computer. So I apologize.
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
So in going back to the graphic, I think it's important for us to start with the second image where we're giving those supports and be really conscious and intent on moving to the third one where
Yeah.
just
Oh, I like that. I'm gonna.
That's really good.
How would you summarize that without referencing the graphic?
Let's see.
Well, just begin with appropriate support to include, to involve everyone and move toward a more, what's that word? What's a word?
Removing systematic barriers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. See, this part of it, we're writing a lot. I'm writing everything and kind of brainstorming, and then I want to pull some of these keywords out, and then I want to kind of create a single sentence, almost elevator definition of what equity is to the Master Naturalist program, thinking within still the context of our program and our mission as well. Does anybody want to add anything else or pull anything from that first? Is there anything that you like about the first definition here?
I don't really think we can improve on the first definition, but I'm willing to try.
Or what speaks to you in reference to the Master Naturalist mission specifically?
Ask that question again.
Yeah, so what part of this definition works specifically within the Master Naturalist mission context? For me, it's the word ongoing. Something that we haven't talked about yet is that equity is all of the work that we're doing today and throughout diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is an ongoing effort. But equity specifically is that movement of progress. It's an ongoing movement of progress towards removing those biases, and then with that intentionality for creating or for removing those barriers as well.
I would add that a lot of times it's going to be recognizing that we need to do this in the first place. I know not everyone is already on the same page. And so I think getting, if that makes any sense, is just recognizing that, and we deal with this a lot in the 4-H program. One of our main goals is to teach or to model that we think of others before ourselves. And that's becoming increasingly difficult, I think, in our society in some realms.
Well, that comes from that word unintentional barrier. We don't even know.
Exactly.
We don't know we're setting up barriers a lot of times.
Right.
But we are.
And
I think
And-
equity also includes like language.
That's a good one.
Having some of our materials, having presenters.
Yeah.
It's not just physical, it's language, it's all aspects of people.
It's Zoom, it's computers, does everyone have access to cell phones to scan a QR code? I mean, there's so much that goes into, being equitable.
I keep thinking that when all the things that y'all are saying, removing barriers involves accessibility, right? And so all these 4 terms that we're defining all go together.
Yeah, that's true.
They do, but we have to be able to also pull them apart and talk about them
Yes,
separately.
I know.
At the same time. That's the fun part of today.
I kind of think the foundation of the definition for equality or equity is our idea of community. We fraction ourselves off so much that we fail to recognize the other communities around us and their needs.
I love that. Okay.
So the challenge that I see with the first definition on the page is really the very first sentence. And we all say, yeah, it should be fair, but fairness, the idea of fairness differs from every person to every person. So you're never going to get agreement on what's fair. That's a challenge with a lot of this, is there's so much diversity in the definitions of what all these things mean, and how it impacts people.
Yeah, I think you're right about that too. And it says, Mary Pearl was talking about having a living document. We need some kind of documentation that says this is what we believe, but, have it open to change. I think that includes some definitions of fairness.
Yeah. And of course that going down, defining every term is going down a rat hole that I'm not sure we'd ever get out of.
It is, but it's a starting point so that we all are starting. You've got to have a place where you start with a common vocabulary and common definitions to then go down that rabbit hole like you're talking about, Bob, so that then as we get further along into, okay, how are we going to remove those systematic barriers for equity? We all understand what we're talking about, and it's an ever evolving kind of what's the Ferris wheel as we go down and provide actions to remove barriers, then we're re-identifying new barriers and new definitions for fairness. So that's the cycle, and being intentional, knowing that it is a cycle that is not one to just take easy.
Yeah, change is hard for people. And I think
For sure.
I think a list of words that could be behind the word fair, at least in our conversation, would be, because like you said, it's going to be hard to come to one definition that everybody feels comfortable with. But I know with the work we've been doing, we take 2 steps forward and then we kind of have to stop and relook at something because somebody has had a feeling or reaction to something that none of us even thought about or anticipated as far as our diversity work. And so then we kind of go back and rethink and think, what did we not consider when we did that?
Yeah,
So I agree, it has to be ever going and on changing.
And I wouldn't say that it's just 2 steps forward and a step backwards. I would say it's a step to the side. You're
Yeah.
going in
Yeah,
different
exactly.
directions. Yeah.
You're right. It's not backwards. It is. It's just kind of slow down and let's think a little bit more as we go forward.
Mhm. I love that.
Well,
Okay.
and it's really, to use a sailboat analogy, you're tacking.
Oh, wow.
You're not sailing directly.
Right.
There you go.
I
I like that. That's cute.
That's good, Mary Pearl.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we want to make sure that as we're moving to the side or we're tacking, there's still the Master Naturalist mission at the heart. That's still our
Exactly.
long-term goal, is to provide that education, service, and outreach of natural resources to all communities of the state of Texas. And so while we may do that in different ways, and we may continue to create these unintentional barriers, or as we're continuing to remove these unintentional barriers, excuse me, not create, but remove these unintentional barriers, we're maintaining that direction forward in our mission. Okay.
Well, we do create barriers as we go, because like right now, I know that we're moving, as is everyone else, a lot toward the technology type stuff. And we have people who are like, well, I don't want a new app.
Yeah.
I don't know how to use that. So we just did something really simple and added a little 10-minute training to every meeting to kind of say, okay, here's how you use the new calendar. Here's how you.
I love that. Recognizing that there are unintentional barriers or not necessarily intentional, but there are barriers that are created through progress and through movement and direction. But recognizing that you always have to be aware of those and moving them, or providing resources for them. So with the last 3 minutes, again, I apologize about this pace that we're going, but we do want to try and do all of the things World Peace today. What words do y'all want to use to put together the Texas Master Naturalist Program defines equity as?
Equal access to resources.
Okay.
Do you want a general definition or a broad one? I guess we've already got our broad definition.
We've got some broad ones. I want something that speaks to Master Naturalist. Defines equity as equal access. I want to talk about these intentionally removing unintentional barriers, because I think that's something that that is important when you're talking about equity, specifically equity.
Well, you put the word by there.
By,
instead
yeah.
of- Yeah, yeah.
And I think we have to start with the recognition that we have them,
Mhm.
Agree.
recognizing what they are.
And I think you can't have equity until you have that other person involved that's different than us or sees the world different.
Agree with that too. Keep it going, geniuses.
Everybody's not like us.
Let's be real, most people aren't.
Okay. So with our last minute, and who would like to be our spokesperson today? Would somebody like to volunteer to be our spokesperson and help us to read some of this? And knowing that this is not final and we're going to have a little bit more work we'll have to do on it, but this gets us started.
I can do that.
Thank you, Rena. I'm gonna write it down. Woo, that's nice.
So what, yeah,
Just helping us to read this in the larger group.
okay, just the definition or how we arrived at it?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
So the Texas Master Naturalist Program defines equity as equal access to, I want to change the word resources to all that the program does, to education, outreach, and service.
Yeah, I think that makes it a lot better.
Mhm. I do too.
Okay,
That's a good start.
that gets us where we're going. Okay, I'm gonna have to close the breakout rooms. Y'all can stay here for just a little bit longer. And that should have announced that breakout rooms are coming back.
Okay, well, y'all chime in. Don't let me be the only one if I miss.
Hey, thanks
Represents
for
it.
volunteering,
Absolutely.
Rita.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Welcome back, y'all. I'll give you a few minutes as you're coming back from your breakout rooms. Thank you all for participating in this part of the interactive workshop. Breakout rooms are a fantastic tool to get small groups out of a large group like we have today. Welcoming everybody back. Thank you guys. Welcome, welcome back. I get to see all your faces. Hi. Awesome. Hi there. Okay, so breakout rooms have closed, and I hope that they were a huge success for you. In my breakout room, it was awesome and great discussion. And I hope that everybody enjoyed that experience of going to a breakout room, getting to have a smaller group to work on helping to set these common languages and definitions for these words. So I'm going to let the first group present. Kelly, if you will, as your group's facilitator defining diversity, if you will share your screen so that your group's spokesperson can then read off of it. There we go. And who is your spokesperson?
Kathy, take it away.
Oh, Kathy, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, here is our definition. Diversity is an active inclusion and engagement of anyone and everyone who support the Texas Master Naturalist values and mission, particularly those who are underrepresented in the TMN community today.
And can you tell me a little bit about your process that y'all went through as you got to this definition?
Right. We kind of started at a more finite level of trying to look at diverse groups, and we decided that if as long as we tried to list one, we might exclude another. So we wanted to make it active, to include them, and then as proof of inclusion was our engagement. We also wanted to say anyone and everyone, and so anyone represents an individual, and everyone might represent groups of individuals. And we felt like anyone who could, who wanted to agree to the Master Naturalist values would also support it. So it was a little stronger word and proof of that. And then particularly those who were underrepresented in the TMN community.
I like that. Is there any comments, feedback on that group's definition? Excellent. So all of these docs are going to stay open and are going to be available for your chapter to go back and refer to. And we'll pull these, if there's some of them I'm imagining might need just the chapter or the definition pulled out in bold and large font, and we'll do that and clean those up so that y'all have access to those after today's workshop. All right, so let's go on to our next group. Our next breakout session was the group is the defining inclusion. And David, I believe that was your group that you helped to lead. If you will help us to identify your spokesperson and somebody share their screen.
It's me.
Oh, hold on. So we're focused on defining inclusion. We had very active conversations going on. A lot of information was shared and kind of brought it to sort of a close. We still had some thoughts around it, but we think we've come up with something that most of the folks in the group felt was very important. And Katie is going to be our fantastic person.
Yes. Hi, let me see, share my screen.
I can also share it if you'd like me to as well, Katie.
Let's see.
You've got it.
Oh, hold on. What's going on? It's recording. Let me. Hold on 1 second.
We got you.
Why is it? All right, I'm just gonna read it. Okay. Can y'all see that? I'm double split
part of
screen.
it. Yeah, we can see part of it, and the create edit is in the way. Would it be easier if I shared it, Katie?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I'm on an iPad right now, so it's
No problem. Okay, here we go. It's all yours.
all right. Cool. Definition, defining inclusion. Inclusion is all means all, welcoming inclusion of abilities, economics, and family situations. Us reaching out and adapting, not vice versa. Eliminating isolation, breaking down barriers, creating and maintaining a welcoming environment that is nurturing and supportive to all. Listening and learning to diverse voices, active growth and change, leaning, listening, and changing, engagement, actively seeking input, constant improvement, evolving, not only inviting everyone to participate, but also encouraging diverse paths to engagement. Valuing and appreciating everyone in the community in which we live, the enjoyment and stewardship of nature. And then practicing inclusion. We really liked practicing inclusion eliminates isolation and allows everyone, regardless of their differences, to feel valued and appreciated by the entire organization. So.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Love the all means all. I think that is a fantastic way to really pull it all together.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that it's, I feel that it's super important. You know, for example, I walked into Master Naturalist, you know, less than a few months ago. And for me, being a person of color and not growing up doing the activities that most people do, it was super, it was really amazing watching these people and the elders and just everybody come together and like help each other out. And, you know, I'm learning a lot from that. And also, you know, being married to my wife, you know, I am a part of the LGBTQ community, you know, so it's super, everybody was super welcoming. And I feel like our chapter is really inclusive. So I think it's important.
I love that. And then the words active and evolving really pull out here to me as well, as it is a constant work to maintain that inclusion and welcoming environment as well.
Yes, yes, we shouldn't be stagnant. It should continue to keep on evolving. So,
yes.
Yeah. So.
Any comments, questions, rally cheers for the defining inclusion? Okay, we'll go to the next group, defining equity. And that was my group, so I'm going to pull that screen up for you here. And Rena is our spokesperson.
Okay, so we had quite a long discussion, and our end product is the Texas Master Naturalist Program defines equity as equal access to education, outreach, and service of our natural resources by intentionally removing unintentional barriers, recognizing what they are. So we talked about how oftentimes there are those barriers that we don't realize exist. But we need to keep moving in a direction. I think, I can't remember who it was, used the sailboat term of tacking, that we're not just racing in a straight line, but we're hacking back and forth to attain the goal, and it's a never-ending process. And that we start with giving appropriate support to people, and then hopefully as we move forward, the barriers are diminished in such a way that the supports are unnecessary.
Mm-hmm. We had that great graphic as well that was provided.
Yeah, it was very helpful.
And again, the same kind of theme rung in our group as well, that it's an ongoing movement forward as you're identifying these unintentional barriers or barriers that are presented in ways such as we talked about just Zooming today, and the internet access and technology barriers that are created with programming like we're doing today, recognizing that there's opportunities to provide education or provide access, and it's a constant movement to both recognize the barriers that are created and remove them. or provide resources for them. Okay, any questions or comments on the defining equity group? All right. And then our last definition was defining accessibility. Michelle, I believe you were the facilitator in that group. If you'll share your screen and your facilitator.
Yeah, so our group was the defining accessibility group, and I can't say that we further came up with a definition, but we did come up with a lot of additional items to think about as far as accessibility. Who was established as our spokesperson for the group? My group, accessibility group. Do we have a spokesperson
I
today?
don't believe we had one designated.
All right. Do you want me to pick somebody out of the hat?
Yes.
Okay, Scott. Can I?
Thanks. Yep, happy to do that. You know, we got so busy with the meat and potatoes of the issues that didn't quite get to a spokesperson, but and can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. So our definition talked about ensuring that our activities that we engage in and the places that we visit are accessible to all. I guess that's circular to have that in the term in the definition. But our discussion went on to talk about some barriers that aren't the first thing that I thought about with accessibility, which I think of as physical, making allowance for disabilities and accommodations for disabilities. There's a whole range of considerations. We talked about digital and technological accessibility. So there are different levels of comfort in using technology and just different levels of ability and resources that people have. We talked about financial accessibility, and there's it's often occurred to me that there's a kind of arrogance about, well, we can afford to drive here, or we can afford to attend this, and providing scholarships as a possible solution there. Other invisible barriers, language, and the possibility of having translations more broadly available. Thanks for scrolling through here. I can't go back and forth to notes. So there are some chapters that are working on translation of brochures or other documents. We talked about translating presentations as well, and what auto captioning options might be there. When we have field trips, where we go, sometimes have limits about what accessibility there is. Some places are steep or have other barriers to climb over, and the need to be clear about what's available and what's present at the event. So I feel like I'm kind of hopping around here, but we had a pretty broad discussion. Accessibility in terms of timing, having events and options available to allow for schedules. It's one of the diversity layers was how you spend your time. If you're on a strict work schedule, your daytime activities would always be limited. So having options to attend an evening or weekend event. What am I missing?
I think one good thing to mention, and I saw it in one of the previous equity group. The equity group identified that accessibility and equity are very tied together, and as did our group. Accessibility and equity are very tied together. So you'll see that we had made some notes throughout here that accessibility is also, like, some of the accessibility items are also equity items too.
And a strong connection with inclusion as well. When we talk about, making things accessible to everyone, that's another great place where that good all means all phrase comes into play.
Absolutely. Excellent. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Scott, for volunteering to be the spokesperson.
Voluntold.
Voluntold. Are there any other comments or questions? There was some chat in here about how a lot of the groups seem to have expanded the definition as you kind of dove deeper into these words, and you dove into all the things that that are hard to put into kind of single line definitions for each of these words. So any comments or questions as we go forward into working with these definitions, with these words? So Michelle and I are, Michelle, if you'll talk about kind of the next step with the documents with these words. And the chapters, taking the words and helping to pull those definitions out.
Yeah, so obviously a big effort today was we needed your help in further defining, and we asked for your help in further defining what the common language is for each of these items amongst the group. And a lot of the groups, I guess every group except for mine really came up with a more fuller definition. But my group really, the group that I had, they completely added more to what accessibility means. And so the thing, I think that probably all of our groups to go forward now is how do we agree on what the definition is for each of these items for having common language among us. And I don't have a preconceived idea of how that goes. So I'd like to hear from the group, like how do you envision us moving forward with defining, like selecting and really making a definition of these items?
This is Ermi. One thing I think that is helpful would be for you to sit down with our sponsoring agencies, either as the definitions are developed or certainly after they are developed, so that they align up, because I can see our chapter at some point perhaps putting these definitions on our website or, promoting these definitions. And so I'd want there to be clarity around that.
Yeah, and we want to make sure, as some of the other groups mentioned, making sure that we're maintaining that mission focus of the program and of the two supporting agencies. I like that, Ermi. Thank you. And Michelle and I can definitely do that and take all of the notes that have been added to these documents and work with our agency partners, work with the chapter leadership, and hone them into more bite-sized, concise definitions. Okay, I'm going to move us along. I think there's still some work to do on those, but just to keep us on time, we are officially on break from 10:50 to 11. As we break, you can answer our comment here in the chat if you'd like to, but feel free to find that restroom, find some water, run outside real fast and get some vitamin D. And we'll see you back here at 11 o'clock sharp. Thank you, guys. Okay, we're going to get started here with our next section. Michelle, are you back?
I'm here.
Good.
Am I up? Or are you checking me? Am I up?
I think so. I wanted to thank everybody for adding some comments into the chat room on where your chapter is. And one of my favorite answers is that they are both A and C as a chapter. They are implementing things, but then recognizing that there is a lot to still learn and feel like they're just getting started every time they discover something new within the DEIA realm. Okay, so our next section of our agenda is to talk about pillars, strategies, and measures of success for chapters. And Michelle, if you want to introduce the idea of what pillars are and then what our objectives are under these three definitions.
Sure. So the pillars that we've identified for the workshop today are actually the pillars that you identified for us. When we surveyed our chapters over the course, the 2 or 3 times that we've done over the course of the past year, throughout the Be the Change efforts that our program has started, you told us in the latest survey that in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the pillars of the true pillars of the program are actually where your chapters and you as members wanted to start or focus on for our efforts here in kind of further defining and developing strategies for these areas. You said recruitment, retention, and outreach were all important areas for your chapter. And if we could develop strategies around those areas to address diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, that would be helpful to you, not only at the local level, but as a whole statewide program movement. So when we talk about recruitment, the pillar of recruitment, you told us that recruiting from a diverse, highly skilled group of potential community naturalists to train and serve natural resources and natural areas within their communities. Engaging is the first step of recruitment and being visible in all communities. So, so many of these words in here point directly back to our mission. So again, the pillars that you wanted to focus on today are so greatly tied to our mission too, so that it's just a huge balance and help of all of these. The pillars are a huge balance and help towards the mission. Retention, you told us that you wanted to cultivate a culture that encourages collaboration, flexibility, and fairness to enable individuals to contribute to their full potential. Both our members at that level and full potential individuals to contribute to their full potential at the local level, like within our communities too, the people that we serve. And then outreach, you told us providing volunteer service and conduct education programs in a manner that prioritizes diversity and curates a culture of inclusion with accessible and equitably implemented programming for all communities was important to you. So again, reaching outreach or addressing outreach, thinking of strategies that address outreach at both levels, not only at the chapter level, providing outreach and education to our own members and new members, but also the outreach and education that our members provide back to the public and the community.
And so what we'd like to do with this next section of our program today is to go through each of these pillars together as a whole group. We were going to do them as breakout groups, but we identified that as a whole group, we'll have a higher diversity in our chapter represented on the call today. small chapters, large chapters, urban chapters, rural chapters, younger chapters, older chapters, chapters with different diversity mixes within their membership. And so really having a whole program and whole audience today buy-in on the action items under each of these pillars makes more sense than trying to divide and conquer on these today. So in the next part of this section of our work today, we're going to go through setting some example goals, strategic actions, and success measures. The things that we are going to present in the next section are previously suggested or demonstrated program work that chapters have done. These are ideas that have come from partner organizations or from state level planning. By no means is the list that we're presenting on these pillars exhaustive of everything that is included under potential strategies and actions for your chapter to intake. But we wanted to demonstrate and kind of model the process for creating goals, strategy actions, and success measures for these SMART goals that you can use at a chapter level to take home and to work on more. So please, there is more work to be done within your chapter DE&I committee to further develop and localize your goals, actions, and measures of success. As an example, we're using the outline where goals are in bold, and at the 1 level with a numerical level, strategies are in italics. At the A level or alphabetical, and then small letter numbers are actions and measures. And as always, these are examples. We are going to do this as a whole group. And again, by doing this as a whole group, we're hoping that you are bringing your individual chapter's context into the picture, as we have a wide variety of chapters represented today. And consider that you're providing input and experience from your chapter that other chapters may not have thought of, as these are, again, non-exhaustive. These should be added to today in ways that any different sizes, locations, and styles of chapters can then choose upon, and maybe consider this playbook as almost a menu selection of ideas to start that ball rolling towards. Michelle, do you have anything else? I think you were supposed to talk about this slide and I jumped the gun on it. I was excited.
That's totally fine.
Okay.
So the other thing we wanted to point out here too is that obviously our work over the next where are we at hour and a half, we will go into the lunch hour, and just a reminder that this is a working lunch. Bring your lunch to the session and take a break to eat as needed.
Okay, and I'm going to maintain sharing my screen and bring each of these over. Michelle, will you redrop the links for the working folder so that everybody has access to that? And we're going to start with the recruitment pillar, and we're going to maintain our work on the recruitment pillar until 11:40. I'm going to watch that clock and bringing that over now. Okay. All right, so we are on this one, and I'll just go ahead and I'll grab that full share link here. There we go. There. So again, how we've broken these documents down, and I'll spend a little bit more time talking about that on this one since we've got some time in our agenda now. But then you'll be able to see that in the next two as well. We have identified some example goals, again, non-exhaustive.
Just a little bit.
What?
Can you zoom in on that?
Yes,
Just a little? Thank you.
There we go. We've identified some example goals, and then under those goals, some example strategic actions. Some of these actions may be single actions to address single goals, or may be tied together in reaching common goals. These are the actions intended to be taken to meet those goals. And then those success measures that chapters can utilize as they move forward in taking these actions to either gauge their progress or gauge the movement along the spectrum of reaching those goals. And then at the bottom of this page, we have some example planning, goals, strategies, and action measures These are some from the top and then some new ones as well. And I'll get to that in just a second. So I'm going to read these. I don't know another way to go through these, but I want to add to them as we're going through them some goals under recruitment, and then some strategic actions of reaching those goals. Also, you'll note that the green question here is something that we want you to take back to your chapter and ask locally as well. Does our recruitment strategy fully reflect our values? Does our pool of local knowledge include voices from different communities in our service area? Do we understand the conservation concerns of our entire service area? Who are we not serving? So those are questions that locally could be asked. So let's talk about recruitment goals. 2 identified goals so far are to be visible to a diversity of communities within the service area and to successfully recruit from all areas throughout the service area. What other goal would you have as a chapter in a recruitment? Can you all see my screen okay?
I think we need to make efforts to recruit from various age ranges, because when I joined the Master Naturalists, most of us were retirees or near retirement, which does not bode well for longevity if you don't get a lot more young people in there. So I think we need to focus on maybe a junior Master Naturalist program. I think somebody told me we had something like that before, where we get school-age children, get them involved in the activities. They don't necessarily need to earn a certification or anything, but just to expose them to what the Master Naturalists do, so that later on in life, when they have more time, more resources to spend on it, then maybe we can get more younger people in.
Okay. I'm going to take the younger audiences Junior Master Naturalist program idea to the strategic actions, as that is an action that would then fulfill the goal of recruiting with the intention for creating longevity in the program.
How about the high school age kids? We don't seem to be doing anything to attract that age.
Well, I have a project that I'm monitoring, that I'm leading for Hayes County. And every March, the entire senior class of Dripping Springs High School, they come and work on that project. And they've been most enthusiastic. And sometimes they've asked, you know, it's usually set up for an hour, maybe 2. They've asked to stay longer to do more work on the project. So like I said, if we outreach to the younger set, we get them in earlier, and we have people who are in the program longer.
What if we had like a youth council, like with like high schoolers, like introduce them to the Master Naturalist program, get them on like different projects and stuff, but also like get their input on, you know, what their thoughts are with the environment, you know, getting them in like high school age is really good, because, you know, they're able to, you know, think for themselves and you know, they come from all different backgrounds. I think it would be important to like maybe get a high school council in the mix.
I think that's an excellent idea, because we could also maybe impact what they study in college if they're going on to college.
Ooh, that's a good idea. I like that also. That's super, super important.
We do have collegiate chapters, and we have many of our chapters do target outreach and engagement events with young audiences, hosting youth-oriented outreach or programs under the title Junior Master Naturalist or things like that. So I think those are definitely ways that we can work to include those younger audiences in our audiences, younger folks in our audiences of the programming, as a way that we then are, as Dr. Lopez mentioned, all of our conservation efforts and participation equals conservation. There. Okay. What other goals would you have for your for your recruitment. And I'm sorry, I'm going to step back. This is our first time doing something like this. I think I'm going to change how I'm doing this so that since we're talking about goals and then you'll switch directly into strategic actions for those goals, I'm going to pull these two down into the styling of this down here. And I'll show you how we're using this. So this is number 3. And this is bold. This is a goal here. And this is a strategic action to be taken to reach that goal. And that's an A. And that strategic action is outreach and engagement programs with younger audiences. And success measures for that strategic action would include more youth programming in communities. So that, again, I'm just trying to mimic the styling of how to create these kind of, here's our goal, here's the action that the strategy that we want to take, and here's the measure of success for reaching those goals. And there may be multiple measures of success to reach those strategic actions, multiple actions that help to reach those goals. And so I'm going to go back up to this one and have y'all help me flesh this one out a little bit more, and then we'll go down the list. So these are the goals from up above. Be visible to a diversity of communities within the service area. An example strategy that was suggested by a chapter during during one of our work groups last summer, and then Kelly helped us to flesh this strategic action out a little bit more, was to approve and conduct at least one publicized volunteer activity with TMN identified volunteers in each public park or natural area, community, municipal, county parks within the chapter service area. So that's that being visible part. And some actions and measures for that strategy is to develop a list of descriptions and locations of the past so many years of approved volunteer service area, then plot those on a map for each of those approved volunteer activities that has at least 1 hour counted from any of your chapter's volunteers. Repeated visits should be reflected in the map with kind of a heat map type scenario. Identify which public green spaces have not been visible or visited and which have not been well visited by your chapter. And then targeting not well visited green spaces for additional volunteer opportunities in the future. A success measure there is to add, and this would be a tabulation that your chapter could identify. We are successful when we have added at least X number of new locations each year and hold no more than Y events in any one area each year. That might be a formula that your chapter decides to use. So again, just wanted to run through that kind of example. Michelle?
Oh, yeah, there is a suggestion on a possible goal. Lisa mentioned a possible goal could be membership has the diversities of the surrounding community. And it looks like Gina has a question too, or a suggestion. Did you have your hand up, Gina?
Yes, I didn't know if I could speak out or just wait, but I was wondering, one of the things that we have found in Cross Timbers Master Naturalist is something that also came up in the workshop Black Outside, I want to say, the TMN Be the Change workshop. I can't remember, was it Alex? I can't remember his last name.
Yep, Bailey.
Bailey, okay. Which was, we have partners, we have other organizations that have that are partners in our community who are doing similar work. They're not master naturalists, but they're doing similar work, and they have more diversity in their efforts than we do. And so we don't, even though we do want to recruit more, Alex's comment, as I recall, was, maybe we could look at more partnering instead of, I don't know, it's like poaching or something. We don't want to be seen as poaching. We just want to partner. And maybe in so doing, there might be resources that we would offer in terms of training. I think people just want to know, outsiders in any context have reason to not trust or not really understand what is the motive. Why are people wanting to, I don't know. I don't know that I'm able to phrase this well, but I think it would be nice if we had some examples, or if even if it were a goal, to think about partnering and then, building relationships. And I think that it's the relationship building piece that is maybe missing in terms of the recruitment from what I see. Yes, it's very good to be to have the goals that are more well, anyway, these ones that are scaled out. I'm just trying to figure out if there could be another goal or maybe another metric or something that's about building relationships with other organizations so that it spreads the word about master naturalists and can achieve long-term some of the things that we're talking about. I don't know how to articulate.
The Be the Change webinar series did address or talk about this specifically. Actually, a couple of them. That was a common theme throughout a couple of them. But Kelly, Simone, and the team that presented in, was it August, Mary Pearl? August or September, talked about this same thing too. Connecting with other organizations, and really engaging with them, having that kind of two-way street conversation about where we can help each other and where we could leverage each other's strengths in the community.
One of the Be the Change, that I don't remember which one, he talked about, don't go in as the expert or the group who knows it all. Go in a way that you want to work together.
That was Alex. Absolutely. Yeah, that was a great one.
It was.
April. I see some comments in the chat. Blanca's mentioning number 4. Could we say membership reflects the diversity of the surrounding community? I like that. Okay. There's some great additional comments and suggestions in the chat as well. All right, do y'all want to keep building out this one? Do y'all want to move up and build out some of the other ones that were previously suggested? I'm open for direction here. I'll read some of these so y'all can see some of these. And I apologize about moving around all over the place. So a previously suggested goal that we had submitted through one of our earlier surveys was successfully recruit from all areas throughout the service area. We had, I believe it was the Hayes County chapter, present their chapter highlight during the July Be the Change seminar. And one of the things that they did, and it kind of gives some of the steps here in the number 1 is they identified again, they used a mapping system and census data to overlay where their current members were, where their current projects were, so that it became pretty apparent to them where their members were not coming from and where their volunteer service projects were not happening. And so looking for those areas where master naturalist potential or potential projects could happen in order to create that additional visibility in those communities or in those parts of the county or the service area of that chapter. By creating projects or hosting projects in those areas, then that visibility turns to the potential for recruitment as well. So here's a An example success measure, obtaining and georeferencing 100% of all successful and non-selected master naturalists, as well as 85 of all location-based volunteer service activities. So that gets into some of your Google Map census data stuff as well. This one, use the map data to target opportunities. That's that volunteer service project part of the mapping. Provide link for resources so no deep dive is necessary. Overlay successful applicant map with map of volunteer service and classroom or lab activity. Target areas with both fewer successful master naturalist applicants than expected and fewer volunteer and education activities than expected for more intentional volunteer service, classroom and lab activity, and active recruitment. So, and here the terms fewer than expected refers to the concept that if there was a fully realized DEIA, the applicants, volunteer service locations, and education locations on this map that you've now created would appear randomly distributed over the landscape rather than clumped. And a success measure here would be annual progress towards randomized location of recruits. And I think we need to add in projects. Projects implemented, not projects planned, but projects actually fully implemented. Okay. Are there other suggestions for action items, examples from your chapter, your chapter's work that you've seen that have helped to provide action, strategic actions towards these goals?
Mary Pearl, this is Thomas Hollingsworth with Indian Trail. I don't have a specific example of something that we're working on, so I'll just kind of pose this out here for you. And if it doesn't fit in this pillar, let me know. But I think one of the things that could be done that we are not doing is, and it kind of follows up with the last few comments about partnering. And that is that one of the best ways, I think, to engage other folks in the community is by collaborating on a mutual project. And I think it will be something that I'm sure we'll discuss. Rena Sutphin, our president, she and I will be talking about this afterwards. But I'm sure there are other activities, other organizations that have activities that we could, have a sister partnership with, so to speak, where we both participate in a mutually a project of interest that is, related to nature or being in the outdoors that may not fit traditionally what our immediate goals have been, but it expands our view of conservation and engagement in the outdoors and stewardship. And so I'm just kind of proposing an idea that I think it would be great if our chapter or other chapters looked in the coming year and began actively working on developing a collaborative relationship with another organization that perhaps engaged more folks that are underrepresented, and that we go in with mutual interest, so that we are, as was said earlier, we're not going in as an expert, we're going in as let's learn together, let's participate together, and therefore we're enjoying the outdoors as well as providing stewardship, and we're collaborating in the process. It seems a natural flow to do something along those lines.
Absolutely. Michelle, I'm not watching chat, so if there's things that I need to catch up or capture from there.
I was just going to ask you how you want to move forward. So some people are putting things in chat, and I don't know if maybe the best way is to kind of capture those notes and ideas in this document, since everybody has kind of live access to this document.
Yeah, if you have,
rather than us kind of cut and pasting into the document later.
if you can, feel free to add those into the document where available, because I am not that good at typing that fast, as my spelling has shown today, or my inability to spell has shown today.
So one thing came in just this minute from Bob, and he asked, can we remove the words highly skilled from the poll? It sounds that if you're not already highly skilled, you're not a part of our project recruitment pool. So that's a great note, Tom. Thanks for Bob. Thank you.
Let me pull the objective of the pillar in. I didn't actually put that on here.
And others that have added stuff in the chat, these are great. You have some great things, and there's a lot coming in. If you could help us get some of that information captured on this document, by going into the document and adding in there, I just don't want to miss anything. Things are happening. They're kind of coming in fast.
So I've kind of been mulling over one. I'm not sure if it applies right here, but sometimes it was kind of mentioned earlier about generations. Different generations talk differently, and sometimes you might be expressing something personal about yourself to a group of people, like in a work environment or say so, and you might use the wrong word, and it seems like sometimes people might take those personally, and it can shut people down from wanting to share any information. And I wonder if there's such thing as maybe having our current members understand that when other people do try to share stuff with you, maybe they might not use the right terms that you agree with, but we can all just listen to their opinion and let them be heard. I don't know if that would be appropriate for ongoing members, but it might help.
Yeah, what I'm thinking there is one of the things that you'll see on our, actually on the next pillar, the retention pillar, is we talk about the way that we're communicating, the kind of shared common communication within our membership, but that also applies externally in that recruitment part as well. So we reference it in the next document that we'll go through, but we didn't really talk about it in this one.
Could there be like a vocabulary list of certain used words that are current or that are being used?
Yeah, I think that goes.
Sorry, I'm just like.
No, I think that's in the visibility part. So I really think that's in that be visible to a diversity of community of volunteers. The action there is the visibility in and recognizing the common language.
Yeah.
Recognizing.
Sometimes this gets addressed with just a brief reminder of the set of ground rules that everyone is going to agree to, so that if someone says something that is offensive, that there's an opportunity for it to get talked about. Like there's just like a set of ground rules at the beginning, so that hard feelings don't get exaggerated. So if you just think about any kind of meetings, right, where people all get and they're going to talk about something, there's like some kind of agreement of ground rules that we're going to abide by.
Yeah, and specific within the frame of, and David, I see your hand, but within the frame of the recruitment piece here, and that would be more in that kind of external audience discussion. David, you have probably a lot to say on this.
Actually, Lisa kind of stole my thunder. There you go, Lisa. No, Lisa's absolutely right. In the start of each of the conversations, regardless of the group, you need to include in there if there is terminology that is used or something like that, give folks permission to call it out. That don't run the risk of folks shutting down. Give them permission on the front end hey, if there's something I said that's antiquated or something that might seem offensive, this is the notice for you to call us out or to bring that to our attention so that we might all be on the same page and just be authentic with that. And that's the world of problems.
Authentic, yes, that's such a good word. Authentic, connection, vulnerability, all of that's like so important.
Great. I am loving seeing all of the active work here as well. Again, and these are things that that your chapter will be able to take and add to and frame within the context of your chapter and where you are on the progress as well.
Mary Pearl?
Yes, ma'am.
This is Kathy Webb from the Elm Fork chapter. I wanted to add something. It's on the intentional efforts to recruit members as an action and a measure of success.
Where am I looking?
Number 3, intentional efforts to recruit membership. Yeah. There are, I've done this on the project level, but not on the chapter level. And in high schools in Texas, I know in this area anyway, they were required to have a certain number of volunteer hours. So on the project level, I've gone to the local high school to speak with those individuals, starting at the principal and whoever's doing the science club and that kind of thing, and recruiting them actively to work on a project. And so that since if that's something done statewide, it might be something already in place and an opportunity for us to get involved. And the same might go for scout programs or other types of programs that the students are actually, before they graduate, are required to have a certain number of volunteer hours.
I don't know if that's done on a statewide basis, but the Dripping Springs seniors that come to my project, they are doing it for their service hours.
Excellent.
Yeah, we have college kids. So I work for Campfire Central Texas, and we recruit college kids from UT and to have service hours also within, like, you know, whether that be like instructing at after school program that we implement, or, you know, doing data collection, or, you know, whatever that might be, you know, adding, you know, we could have a college kid, you know, do first Fridays with us, you know, in accrue hours, or like think of other ideas that we could implement within the events that we do. So yeah, I mean, college students are always looking for like internship hours, volunteer hours, you know, for certain classes and stuff, depending on what they're graduating with.
I would like to point us to the chat where Cheryl said something about their recruitment or into their new class. I don't know if anybody else is having that experience.
So Cheryl says, and I was going to mention the time, we've got a few more minutes before I am going to have to be forced to switch us. Cheryl says, we sent our new member application online link to 400 people who had indicated interest for the 35 spots that they had available. Our outreach was great, but our first come first serve system results in little diversity every year. And so that's a barrier for creating that open recruitment. There's how would you change that first come first serve to a way that allows for those 35 spots to be filled in a way that is equitable?
Mary Pearl, we created a matrix that we use. And so there are different categories, from amount of volunteer service, questions about how would they use the knowledge that they learn. There's about, I don't know, 20 different indicators. And so, and this past year, because we did a lot of new specific diversity and inclusion recruitment, we added some points for that. but that enables us to have a broader age range. My new class for this year has people from 22 to our oldest, who's 80. We had 106 applications and we selected 51. But it enables us to then not just first come, first serve, but looking at what they bring, what kind of experience they have, but they're not penalized for not having 10 years of volunteer service in the natural world, because many of our people in their 20s and 30s with kids, they're not there yet. But we have a great class this year, and I don't think we could have done it if we hadn't done it that way.
That's great. I hate interrupting momentum when we have momentum, but I really want to make sure that we are staying on topic or staying on time with our agenda. It's one of the barriers that we have set on today's agenda. So I apologize about that. But again, these living documents are going to stay open, so y'all can come back to these, add to these. Michelle and I will go through the chat and we'll pull some of the stuff from chat that applies here and put it on these documents as well within the next week or so. We do have some holidays coming up, but we'll try and get those on here in the next couple of weeks at least, so that y'all have access to that. But it being 11:40, I am going to move into our next working pillar, which is retention. And let me move that over here now. Move this one back over here. Okay. And I messed up and have not added the original objective that we had for retention is now here. Michelle, will you drop that link to retention in the chat as well? Thank you. So you'll have access to this. Okay, so shifting gears. Thank you guys for your patience with this part of it. The objective that we worked to identify as the pillar of retention, again, we're open for your input on this one, is to cultivate a culture that encourages collaboration, flexibility, and fairness to enable individuals to contribute to their full potential. Some example goals that we've identified here. Let me zoom in on this one for you real quick. Some example goals that we've created here is to increase social awareness and acceptance of DE&I concepts, to ensure each member feels like they belong. Some example strategic actions for retention includes implementing DE&I chapter leadership and member education, develop succession planning processes, and that can be both for general membership, but also for chapter leadership. Annually review state policies with chapter membership that addresses and discourages non-inclusive behavior. And we do have both our standards of conduct and our code of ethics at the state level. I need to link those on this, and I'll add that link there on our state website. And then another strategic action suggestion is to incorporate into each new training class program, into say the orientation class, a presentation on the value of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility within the Master Naturalist program. So these are, again, non-exhaustive, some suggestions for creating that culture of collaboration, flexibility, and fairness. Here's some example success measures. Reduced voluntary turnover by diverse members. We are successful when we have growth in support and diversity and inclusion, education, and policies. Succession planning for all volunteer leaders, and is done on a cyclical basis based off of your chapters cycles. Participation in at least 2 developmental activities annually by all members, and 2 can be a number that you choose within your own local chapter. Or better organizational and individual performance due to increased trust and cooperation, and I like that one a lot. Okay. So I'm going to read through these and then I'm going to ask for y'all's input. Again, thank you for your patience as we're trying to figure out the best scenario for working through these together. Some example planning. The structure here is the goals, the strategies and the actions and measures under those strategies, a goal of increasing social awareness and acceptance of DE&I concepts within the Master Naturalist program. An example strategy is to conduct regular chapter side DE&I discussions. So using that word chapter side as like chapter fireside discussions. Some actions would be selecting topics from previous Be the Change series discussions or DE&I topics, presenting equal number live, recording, on your own time, etc. opportunities to engage with that material, facilitating regular discussions on DE&I issues. And then a success measure here is if a example survey question was sent out, given the survey question, chapter leadership values diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and actively promotes these concepts in all aspects of our chapters, your chapter response rate would be 85% agree or strongly agree. So that's a metric example that could be used to measure success within that strategy. Another goal is ensure each member feels like they belong. The strategy here is adopted mentor program where existing chapter members mentor new trainees in each class. We actually do have a fully fleshed out mentor program guideline on our chapter management operating and operations protocol document. That thing right there, and I'll drop the link for that here in just a second. That fully thought out mentor program has been utilized by many of our chapters and is a great way to build that retention, build those relationships, and ensure that chapter members, new members, and current members feel like they belong. Conduct class and chapter member team building projects. That's where there's collaborative projects between new trainee member classes and current chapter members with a final presentation at the end of the year. Use regular open time to facilitate difficult discussions and promote sharing of important but difficult issues. For example, we have a chapter that has a pre or a post chapter meeting open time, almost a safe space for chapter leadership to hear members' concerns or requests for information. And then I think this one's a really easy one, a really easy strategy is to maintain communication, open communication with all of your chapter members by having phone call conversations with people who you haven't seen in a while, haven't maintained their involvement or have reduced their activity, understanding you know, where they're at. Okay. Leadership of chapters is reflective of chapter membership. That's also part of that retention, is making sure, again, this is kind of what we were talking about previously with recruitment, but having a reflective chapter membership as committee chairs and chapter leaders as well, rotating leadership among the diversity of leaders and limiting office duration, providing classes on leadership and administration of Master Naturalist programs to members annually as a way to mentor any who are interested in leadership without introducing unconscious bias. All right. So, Ermi, you have your hand raised. Do you have something to add here?
Yeah, I think one of our challenges is, as members' conditions change, either their family condition or their health condition or something else, it's difficult to kind of help them transition. I don't know if that makes sense, but for example, someone who is extremely physically active and could walk long distances, all of a sudden not being able to do that. Mm-hmm. I don't think we have a very good way of saying, okay, so this project is no longer for you. What else might you be interested in doing? How can you remain engaged if that's your choice, if you want to stay engaged, given your new limitations in whatever dimension?
Yeah, so I think there the answer is making sure that you're, not the answer, but a potential strategy is to make your chapter members aware of all of the different types of volunteer service that are possible within their chapter, so that they don't feel peg-holed into, I am the person who always has to go on the extreme hikes, for example. I could also, as a volunteer, do the website, because that's something that I'm able to do remotely. I know that some chapters have a project fair. Is there anybody on the line whose chapter has an annual project fair program?
Chapter does.
Can you talk about it just a little bit?
Yeah, we have an open house. It's coming up in April this year. All the projects who are wanting to recruit and communicate what they do has a some display space, put a display board or whatever there, and man that, and we open it up to the public. We're inviting county officials as well, and trying to put the word out to not just the people that we know. So they're all invited. We have some refreshments. We have a very short introduction, but the biggest part is that they have an opportunity to see what the projects do and to talk to the people who are leading them. Is that the kind of thing you were asking about?
Exactly what I wanted, Kathy. It's brilliant. And I think that's also an opportunity, as you were saying, that you invite county commissioners and members of the public. That's also a great opportunity to invite those partner organizations in the community that you're looking for additional collaboration potential with, just to show them this is the stuff that we're doing, and we'd love to have anyone and everyone involved. Okay. What else, y'all? Are there activities, strategies under some of these other goals that we've talked about previously? Michelle, I'm not reading chat. Are there things? It looks like you're answering a lot of the chat. Thank you. All right, what else? Blanca?
Yes, regarding the mentor program, I think it's important, or maybe to consider having it as an optional, like optional participation, giving members the choice. Would you like to partner with a mentor, or to just decline it?
That's great. Spelling. Great. All right, what else? Paige?
Yes, this may not be the right place, but it keeps popping into my head, so I'm going to go ahead and mention it.
Say it.
One of the things we're trying to do is, talk with chapters around us. And I don't know how to facilitate that, because I have a hard time finding out who the president is or whatever. Is there a way that we could share information with the chapters around us, and things that they're doing, things that work well, things that don't work well?
Yeah, absolutely. So our chapter presidents we have a monthly chapter presidents meeting each month, where we communicate state level programs or guidelines, policies, events such as this to our chapter presidents. But then we also give them the chance to ask roundtable questions to the other chapter presidents that are on the line. We also have a Slack channel for our chapter presidents to communicate their need. And then some of our other chairs have a Slack channel that they can communicate on. Slack is it's a tool that we haven't broken into as successfully as it could be used. It's a really powerful, but also a really heavy tool that takes a lot of time and effort to work on. And honestly, just it's a staff limitation at this point to monitor and maintain that. But there are methods for our chapters to communicate to others through that. But I think just reaching out to your local chapters via their website, or your surrounding area chapters, their website, their social media, things like that to partner. And I've seen that successfully. I know Scott Hudson in the North Texas chapter, y'all have done regional workshops with your North Texas chapters to partner on projects. Do you want to talk about that and how that's looked? I think that's a great answer for.
And I'm sorry, I was trying to respond to someone's chat here. We've done workshops with, and can you just restate for me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, can you tell us about your regional North Texas collaborative and how you have opened up projects and partnership opportunities with surrounding Master Naturalist chapters?
Sure. Well, we overlap areas. So we have the Blackland Prairie, Elm Fork, Indian Trails, and Cross Timbers are all neighbor chapters. And so there are a number of projects that may be a little bit out of our formal county lines that we will share information or share opportunities on those particular ones where there's some chance for overlap. We try to keep each other apprised of when we're at those kind of territorial edges. Is that kind of what you're leading toward?
That is. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Michelle, what am I missing? I'm trying to type furiously here. Oh, you added the roundtable at the annual meeting. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, one of the things, so in addition to some of the things that we already do, we have the president's meetings. We occasionally have meetings with training class coordinators, and then your chapter representatives. The president's meetings are held monthly. They have an opportunity, and when we don't have as full of an agenda for those meetings, they have an opportunity to have some roundtable questions there. Mary Pearl mentioned the Slack channel. We do offer or have been doing at the annual meeting roundtable discussions or kind of meetups for chapter officers and committee chairs at our annual meeting. Other chapters do like their regional retreats or training days like Scott talked about. I know something similar has happened in the past in kind of the Gulf Coast, Coastal Prairies region with chapters there. Yeah, great. And that I think go ahead.
Social hours, like being able to connect, because some people in our chapter, we have hybrid classes where we still do Zoom and in person. And so a lot of us don't get to talk with, other people in our chapter. So, hosting like social hour and meeting at like a restaurant or wherever to like meet up and socialize and instead of it being in a meeting.
I know that the Hayes County chapter has done that before, and they've done I think it was Hayes, and they did a potluck at a local park, and it was not for hours, not for service project.
Right.
It was we're going to be here. Bring a lunch if you want to. It's a beautiful day. Come eat lunch with us.
Right.
Yeah. Gulf Coast has done something similar as well at a local brewery. Just something casual, fun.
Yeah, casual, fun. Community, that type of thing. Nothing. Yeah.
Oh, and it has to be outdoors because we all like the outdoors. It doesn't have to be. Okay, great. We've got another 5 minutes or so on this one. What other suggestions, action items Food and fellowship. I love it.
I think the leadership needs a little bit of attention.
Okay.
I think we're having difficulty, Gulf Coast chapter, and I'm only speaking from my own experience. I think we're having difficulty recruiting new leadership, especially at the more deeply involved leaders. And I think that's going to come bite us at some point. Again, that's my personal opinion. We have increased our diversity as well as our range of volunteers, but I still see it as, we keep tapping many of the same folks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a common problem or issue across all chapters. Like we keep tapping into the same, or maybe it's the same people are willing to serve continuously. So how do we break that? What are the barriers there, and how do we get past that to recruit and entice new leaders to take the reins as well?
So here an example would be, a strategic action would be to develop intentional leadership recruitment program within the chapter. Some action items to develop that intentional leadership recruitment. Some action items would be hosting a chapter training or a chapter, maybe training is the wrong word, workshop session on the roles and responsibilities of chapter leadership position. Ooh, my spelling. Chapter leadership roles. I think also having job descriptions of which a lot of those are in our bylaws. And then some chapters have them in their chapter operating handbook fleshed out based off of their chapter specific needs. But having job descriptions to be able to share share internally as well. Okay, what other strategies has your chapter used in internally recruiting leaders?
Nancy made a suggestion, or maybe a barrier in the chat. Time and place of board meetings can make it harder to get volunteers to say yes to those positions.
That's a great one.
So I guess maybe that might be synthesized into, changing the time and place of board meetings or time of day.
Or even do some by Zoom.
Yeah.
That's what we've been doing, is really helpful.
We do ours by our hybrid, our board meetings, and we do them at the same time of day as the regular meeting, so that we try not to exclude people that work or people that don't like to drive at night or whatever.
We do our chapter meetings our board meetings by Zoom. And even then, some people have problems because they're working full time and they cannot take off that time of day for a board meeting.
I see some comments about term limits as well.
Yeah, I was just looking that up in the bylaws.
We do have term limits as a suggestion. I don't think it's a requirement in our bylaws. It's in the chapter operating handbook, which I need to reference these here. I'll add those links. Okay, with the last couple of minutes in the retention pillar, does anybody else want to add anything? Rena, you have your hand raised. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Sorry, no, I thought I put it down.
It's okay.
I meant to.
You had great insight. Anything else anybody wants to add about thinking about ways to address retention? Again, the idea here is to cultivate a culture that encourages collaboration, flexibility, and fairness to enable individuals to contribute to their full potential.
Donna Otto, we did the simple act of calling all of our members who had not renewed their dues, especially over the last couple of years with the COVID. And we got a lot of the people back in just by simply making those calls to let them know we were still interested in their membership and how easy it was to pay their dues online now.
Excellent. Okay. Well, somebody's timer just went off and that tells me that it is 12:05. So I'm going to move on to the next one. Thank you guys for helping with that. As we transition, we're going to go into the last pillar, outreach. And Michelle, you want to, while I'm pulling some stuff over here, do you want to talk about the 2 words underneath outreach and what we talked about with those? And I'll pull the links.
So when we talked about outreach in the terms of both education and engagement. So outreach is integral to our department, our program, but within outreach, there's kind of 2 forms there. There's education, outreach that happens in the form of education, both to our trainees, new members, and then education that happens by our members to other members of the public. And then another form of outreach is engagement, where we talk, this is more of the kind of the 2-way street, a sharing of information, engaging with members of the community, engaging with other organizations who maybe share pieces of our mission statement or share, we're doing similar things or have similar things that we care about. And the idea is to engage with them and kind of have that almost a partnership where we've talked about before, leveraging the strengths of both organizations, or leveraging the strengths of our conservation communities. And we see engagement as being a two-way street, but it is a form of outreach.
So do you want to read this part? The pillar objective and then the
Sure.
goal?
So what we had pre-identified there with outreach, the outreach pillar, and what you helped us identify was outreach provide volunteer service and conduct education programs in a manner that prioritizes diversity and creates a culture of inclusion with acceptable and equitably implemented programming in all communities. A goal there could be to build relationships with and outside of communities or organizations already served, deepen the partnerships with diverse and inclusive organizations engaged in natural resource conservation. And so obviously that one could be fleshed out more. We'd seek your input on adding to that goal or adding additional items to that goal. A strategic action to this item could be, and we recognize here that many of these could be tied together. Again, strategic action could be, we could partner with local conservation organizations to create synergy in messages to diverse audiences. We could seek opportunities to promote high quality outdoor engagement experiences close to urban communities. And then another strategic action there is to solicit DEIA stories from all members and circulate via the web, email, print media, or social media, both internally and externally. Some success measures to know how we've been successful at those could be Over time, we see a reduction in the number of areas, neighborhoods, or natural areas that are unserved or underserved by our TMN community and activities. Over time, we see an increased participation in outreach events by communities currently unserved or underserved. And we put both there because there's, I mean, obviously there's within our local communities, there are both cases. There's unserved and underserved communities. Another success measure could be increasing, we're seeing an increased number of volunteers for outreach events at parks and other venues. And then lastly, an increase in interest from diverse community members seeking membership and training or training and membership with the Master Naturalist program. And going further, so an example here of one of those is to build relationships with outside community organizations already served. So fleshing that out a little bit more. Establishing relationships with a variety of area community organizations, including those who serve people not currently represented in our chapter. The strategy there could be to intentionally scour Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Meetup, and other social media and community organizing media to find relevant groups, loop in the leadership of those groups to what you're doing. Another strategy could be to contact leadership to propose a group nature-related activity together or a social activity to build both organizations' networks. Kind of that cross-pollination, cross-communication idea there. Another strategy could be addressing leaders. Leaders provide resources and conduct conversations to educate current members on social awareness and cultural understanding. One way to address that could be leadership reads Crucial Conversations, a book that's been suggested. And the next item, increasing representation in our chapter's promotional and educational materials. Some strategies or actions and measures there could be create or find an image bank with greater representation of wildlife and nature enthusiasts. Review our chapter's website and update it with representative images. A measure of success could be the chapter is viewed as a hub for natural resource engagement throughout the entire community of conservation organizations within your chapter service area.
Excellent. Thank you, Michelle. So are there additional goals that we have here, or would y'all like to flesh out some additional actions to meet some of the goals that we've talked about here for outreach?
Blanca has her hand up.
Yeah, Blanca, thank you.
I think it's important for us to acknowledge and recognize that we need to meet the community where they are in the spaces that they gravitate towards, and never underestimate the power of public libraries, community centers, cultural centers, and recreation centers for recruitment, outreach, and activities.
Completely agree, Blanca. We have Gulf Coast chapter has for the very first time been asked to present at a library. I think that's a missed opportunity for us.
And also most of those locations are already on public transit routes where transportation is not an issue. And so many of our activities, or at least my experience, if you don't have transportation, it's going to be hard to get there. So many libraries, community centers, etc., they're already on that public transportation route, and it adds that accessibility factor.
And that kind of goes back to our first pillar of recruitment when we were talking about looking at a visual of the activities that chapters are actively doing by visually putting a map together of where our members are and where our volunteer activities are. And then identifying those kind of visual locations that our members are not coming from, and then going to those community centers and saying, where is it that would allow us to meet those community members that we're not serving or are underserved with our projects? Where can we go that we can meet them with, meet them where they are with our resources and our message and our outreach activities? Okay, what else, y'all?
There's some items in the chat. I'll read them out. Mohammed suggests outreach at places of worship. And Cheryl mentions that the Hays County chapter has been recruiting at local farmers markets and the reception has been great. Great. I think this is a whole goal here. Needs to become. All right. Blanca, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, I'm not looking at it. I'm sorry if I'm not calling on you.
No, that's okay. Sorry to
no, I love
interrupt again. To add to that also is considering cultural events and community fairs. For example, in our chapter last year, we piloted having a booth at a community center's anniversary event, which was tied into Mexican Independence Day. You would think, well, it has nothing to do with nature, but we had a very positive reception, and I feel it was a very positive outcome, and we used it to outreach and recruitment and education.
Love that. Linda says that was a great event. All right. What other action items and strategies and goals do we have for providing volunteer service and conducting educational programs in a manner that prioritizes diversity and creates that culture of inclusion with both accessible and equitably implemented programming?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
I can't figure out how to raise my hand, so I'm just going to speak up. This is Kathy. I wonder, our chapter recently, our outreach department, somebody was contacted by the city Parks and Rec department, knowing that we're the master naturalists and we know something about nature. And they are actually starting something kind of unique. And I think they were the ones who reached out to us. It is a nature walk for patients with dementia. And so evidently it's gaining some popularity among city departments around the country. So just to say that, don't forget the Parks and Rec department and your local municipality that may not be aware of all that you can do for the community.
I think that harkens back to the idea of this first one, establishing relationships with a variety of area community organizations. And those may not be natural resource oriented organizations like the city Parks and Rec, but they could be. And then understanding what they have what programming they have available. So going to them and not saying, here's what we're bringing to you, but what are you involved with in the community and where can we help?
Exactly. Thanks.
I'm like Kathy, I can't figure out how to raise my hand, so I'm going to jump in.
Go ahead, Larry.
Hey, Kathy and I are in the same chapter. We have a program with the school districts, the Denton ISD and the Louisville ISD, and we have 2 superb outdoor learning areas in our chapter area, and we run thousands of kids through there every year. All the 2nd, 5th, and 7th graders in those school districts go through our outdoor programs at least once during the year. And it's a very good outreach program. It also tells a lot about who Manchester Naturalists are, and hopefully with our youth, we can create some interest, probably not in their working parents, but perhaps their grandparents as to being Master Naturalist.
So there's a number of different ways that you can attack that or work. And I love the Denton program, and y'all were honored, I believe, with the project fair. Y'all presented that last year or the year before at our chapter annual project fair in October. But bringing both the kids to a local green space, if they have the ability, the transportation to get out to a local green space, or taking those natural resource oriented programs to their school grounds. If they're not able to come to you, going to them with your materials as well is great. All right. What else? We have another 10 minutes or so on this outreach pillar. And don't forget, outreach, to, as Michelle talked about earlier, is both a one-way and a two-way street. How we define outreach by thinking of it as an education, that we're sharing knowledge and we're educating others, but we're also wanting to get them involved in that education. That's that two-way work together with the communities. What else? Y'all tell me where to go next. One of the things we haven't talked about yet is this increased representation in our chapter's promotional and educational material, something as easy as making sure that we have broad and diverse identifiers on our program websites, our social media, that we're creating that opening and welcoming message in all of our marketing material as well. Paige, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I don't believe so. Thank you, though. Do I have my hand up?
No, you came on, we got to see your face for just a little bit.
Oh.
This is Rena from Indian Trail again. We have started putting the QR codes that link to our chapter website at some of the city parks. So, you know, it remains to be seen how effective that is, but we anticipate that it will be.
I like that. Scott?
I just comment that in forming these partnerships, one thing we've encountered is just the value of a listening session, to sit down with folks that we might be working with at an organization and hear what their needs and concerns are. There may be a little common ground, or it may be just a tangential relationship between their concerns and our work. But we've had both positive and negative experiences there, where we've well, listen to someone who had created, been very involved in a long strategic planning process, and this just didn't fit in their strategic plan at all. To another organization with Audubon that was looking for exactly the kind of help that, or ways that we could overlap and work together. So there's a little bit of a humbling side of finding that connection and listening to what their needs could be.
Yeah, and recognizing that it's okay if those partnerships or those connections don't work. I also am a strong advocate for making sure that as we branch forward and we move on creating opportunities for partnering on projects, we maintain that master naturalist mission focus, and we don't get into the I know y'all worked with this quite a lot, Scott, on some of your projects, but we be mindful of mission drift and make sure that we are continuing to provide that natural resource centered stewardship and education opportunities, focusing on Texas natural resources, habitats, ecosystems, in a way that maintains who we are as a program.
Yeah, very important.
Mary Pearl, if I may. So first of all, both Sue and Nancy both had great ideas in the chat, translating different things to Spanish for community events, and then also working with homeschool groups to get the parents involved as well as the kids. And then on the topic of engagement and outreach, I just wanted to ask, especially as we're in volunteer month, the social media, the engagement. I noticed that a lot of the times when we post more about members, projects, and then of course like pictures from our annual meeting, it tends to get a lot more engagement and reach than a lot of our like structured TMN Tuesday posts or things like that. So as members and as people who want to be engaged, what kind of things would you feel help reach other people within that social media world? I mean, like if volunteers sent us some of their stuff and we reposted that, or we highlighted different projects, things like that. What kind of interaction on social media are we looking for?
Cameron asked that as our state social media coordinator, student.
Yes, I see the numbers.
Okay, so if y'all
I mean, I would say I'm looking for something that is like a beautiful place. Those are the things that are going to get people's attention. Like if they see something that looks like they'd want to explore or really want to do, it looks like it's something exciting and fun. I mean, those are going to get the people to click on it first.
And then Donna in the chat says that their chapter shares their monthly programs through Facebook Live and through YouTube, which we do as well with the TMN Tuesdays each month. And that's a great way to engage a variety of different social media audiences, those that are watching for exciting pictures and smiling faces of people doing things, but also there for the content, the knowledge gain in order to interact with those kind of visual video materials in a way that they can learn in that way.
Right. So I know we have to close out soon. So with that, if you do have ideas, or maybe you've been on a hike and you want to share the trail that you were on, or things that you found, things that you learned, please email me, because we can absolutely make that like a social media campaign of, you know, trails that our master naturalists love, that sort of thing. So yeah, please email me. Sue, I see
On
you
that,
in the
on
chat.
that vein, I think having stories is another really important thing.
Yes, storytelling, and storytelling is a whole nother avenue that we haven't gone down as we're talking about outreach. I fear that Urmi, you opened a huge discussion point, and I know that there's a lot of material that we have available for that. Right as we're closing, storytelling is vastly important. Michelle, you want to talk a little bit about the some of the stuff y'all have done? Olivia has done?
Well, actually, I was going to talk about some of the things we've already done within our own program. We have launched into the storytelling idea and action through last year, in the last couple of years through the pandemic. We did What Nature Means to Me. We've had, so that's something that's available and on our website for you to look into, or do a spin-off of, kind of pattern your own storytelling at your local chapter level as a spin-off. We have in our 20th anniversary year, the program did another kind of storytelling event where we interviewed, or y'all, our membership interviewed and chapters interviewed historic members, and those longer anniversary kind of history interviews are available. That's another form of storytelling that our program specifically has done. And then and even another form of storytelling that we have is our video contest that we do with the program. So our chapters all across the state are doing different videos and offering those as social media content, telling about their projects, telling about their members, telling about their chapter locally. And that is another form of storytelling that we have. So chapters are doing that individually. We have a contest each year at the annual meeting, or that kind of coincides with the annual meeting, where the video contest could be add to your efforts of storytelling. We're also, we've been talking about offering kind of a storytelling training through one of our TMN Tuesdays coming up. So that's an idea out there. And then within Texas Parks and Wildlife, under the programs that I manage there, we have a outreach and communication specialist, Olivia Hahn, or Olivia Schmidt Hahn, she just does beautiful work on videos and telling story through video, which is another area of storytelling. So, and Paige mentions in the chat, I'm not familiar with storytelling. Can you share the link? So storytelling is actually kind of the buzzword today for outreach and communication and marketing, and telling and using kind of the storytelling or the people and what they're doing to tell the story about your program, your projects, and experience in the Master Naturalist program, or whatever you're storytelling about.
Kind of an oral history narrative format for sharing materials, experiences, and concepts, education. I'm going to cut it off. I'm so sorry. We have 1,000 more things that we could talk about with our program on outreach, and there's so much more here. David, I am going to stop my sharing and hand the agenda to you now. Actually, Michelle, do you want to introduce David real fast? Let me do that again.
Yes. David Buggs will be our next speaker, and he is kind of his session today or presentation with us today is called Framing the Conversation. So we've been through this conversation all morning long, all into the afternoon. And so how do we move forward? How do we frame that now and move forward with the ideas and strategies and actions and definitions that we've talked about? David has been with us on this Be the Change journey ever since we started it, and even in the conceptual phase of bringing it to life and talking about what it could be. So actually David and Kelly have both been helping us throughout the development of the Be the Change webinar series, and then certainly this workshop. So I want to thank you both for being involved in seeing this effort, helping this effort come alive and come to life, and really being the impetus behind this effort, this Be the Change effort for the Master Naturalist program. David is our Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, and his entire position revolves around working with our agency and our programs to develop strategic actions that address diversity, equity, and inclusion within the agency, and kind of thinking of that further and bringing it to life. So without taking too much more time, David, I'll give you the screen, so to speak.
Well, good afternoon, folks. I've been sitting and listening, and this has been extremely great. I love hearing all the suggestions and the different ideas, and I'm looking forward to you all implementing a lot of these ideas. So I'm going to throw some things out there. Some of the things I'm going to talk about are things you've heard before, either from myself or from someone today. I'm just going to hit those real quickly because I think we need to remind ourselves of why we're here and what we're doing while we're here and what we should take back. But also we're going to talk about what we need to do or what we should be doing and how to do some of it. So just bear with me. I'm going to go through some of it pretty quick, but I'm going to make sure that Michelle and Mary Pearl have this presentation. So if you have some questions, you can go through it again, pick some different things out. But we also want to make sure that you're thinking strategically as we go through this process. So with that being said, let's kind of talk about this thing, framing the question, the conversation. So one of the things that I like, and someone just mentioned it, was being a good storyteller. So one of the people that I really admire is a woman by the name of Carolyn Finney. She wrote a book a few years ago called Black Faces in White Spaces. Very interesting. And she shared some things in that book. She talked about outreach, and she said outreach has to be two-way. There has to be reciprocity in the relationship. So as you go through developing your different strategic plans or executing different strategic plans, make sure there's reciprocity. Make sure that you're learning as much as you're teaching. The other thing that we got to keep in mind is whatever the stories are, your story is not the only story when it comes to engaging in the outdoors. So make sure that your experiences aren't just being pushed upon other folks, but listen to some of their experiences as well. Another thing is make sure that we examine some of the biases we have about how we engage in the outdoors. I'll never forget being at a conference at the Grand Canyon with some folks from state organizations and also some federal organizations. And they were talking about engaging folks in the outdoors. And I had someone to stand up in that meeting and says, yeah, all of this stuff sounds really good, but I don't know if I want all of these other people trampling all over my land. Just kind of paused and thought about it. So make sure you examine some of your personal biases as you go through this process. The other thing, and this is very important, this is the thing I'm going to end on with this slide, is I know this is uncomfortable work for a lot of folks. Not for everybody, but for a lot of folks, it's uncomfortable work. But you gotta ask yourself this question. Do you want to be comfortable or do you want to be better? The more we engage those different groups, and Dr. Lopez said it earlier, the more we engage those different groups and get folks out, the better it is for all of us. Not just a win for them, it's a win for all of us. So why diversity and inclusion conservation? Late in the day, lips aren't working. Diversity and inclusion strengthens our environment. As you've heard before, many hands make light work. The more people we have engaged, the better it is for all of us. It also helps us become relevant to this growing audience that we're trying to serve. It's a growing audience across not only our state, but across the nation. So how do we make sure that these resources are sustainable? Because we've got a lot of folks that aren't engaged in the outdoors at all, aren't engaged in anything that has to do with natural resources. How do we make sure that what we do is relevant to them and that what we have and what we appreciate is sustainable? The other thing is the more people have a focus on engaging in these different natural resources and understanding and appreciating them, the more we can engage politicians in supporting what we're trying to do. And that's extremely important nowadays. The other thing, and this is very important to me as well at Texas Parks and Wildlife, when we start talking about the talent growth and natural resources, when you look at the Bureau of Statistics, they talk about the growth in STEM fields. Now, most STEM fields are growing at around 11%, but when it comes to natural resources, it's only growing at around 6%. Think about that. If we don't have the number of folks and the spectrum of folks that are going into majors and careers in natural resources, we all will suffer. So we've got to make sure we're getting everybody engaged, especially young people. I heard that theme throughout the day. How do we get young people engaged? So that's something we really need to think about as we develop our strategic plans. So again, in the absence of a clear and effective communication and a clear and effective plan, what happens? And we all know the results, nothing. And there's no such thing as we stand still or we just don't progress. We go backwards. So we've got to have a clear plan and we've got to be able to effectively communicate our plan, not only externally, but also internally. So let's talk about developing these adaptive and technical relationships and what do we need to do? So first of all, and we talked about this a little bit today, getting buy-in from your chapter on how you move forward. You got to get a certain level of consensus. Now, there are going to be detractors. There are going to be folks that are going to say, well, I don't know if this is for me or this, or should we be doing that? But you got to make sure that you're communicating to them clear goals and clear objectives, understanding that it's not a one size fits all, that it has to be something that is focused on how we are going to engage these different groups, these different audiences, and continue to look at those ideas, making sure that all of this is focused on what your strategic plan is and your mission is for your agency, and making sure that also you bring everybody along with you. Don't just blow somebody off because they don't want to go along with the plan. Make sure they understand the why. Make sure they understand the value it's going to bring to your audience. Again, communicate the value to your mission, and also listen. This is going to be very important. And I'm going to talk about that again a little later on. Listening is extremely important for feedback, both internally and externally. And here's the thing that I like to share with folks. Once you develop your plan, don't marry your plan. Just date it, because you may need to make some adjustments, and it's okay to make those adjustments. I know it's tough and here's the thing I've learned since I've been at Parks and Wildlife. Folks that have a scientific background like to do evaluations, and they like to stick with certain things and ride it out. And then if it fails, go, well, we tried that. Just date your plan. You're going to have to make some adjustments as you go along the way. I heard someone say a little earlier on, there were some failures they had. That's okay. That's a part of the development. That's part of getting closer to the yes for a lot of folks. So just move forward. Some things to avoid, and I heard some of these things today, treating this as an afterthought. If you treat this as an afterthought, you're going to always run into problems. Not connecting what we're doing. We talk about this in our inclusion group. not connecting what you're doing to the mission and goals of the organization. That's a big failure. Also having too much focus on how people feel about certain things, or this is the right thing to do, instead of understanding how these actions are going to benefit the organization, how there's a value proposition attached to this. Also not communicating what you're doing, both internally and externally, and listening again. And making sure that you do those things that are germane to your particular chapter, because some things aren't going to work in every chapter. Chapters in West Texas may not be able to do the same things that chapters in the DFW area or in the Houston area can do, because you're dealing with different groups of people. You're dealing with different terrain, different actions, and different organizations that are in place. There are some Native American organizations that a lot of folks in West Texas can take advantage of. When I say take advantage of, I mean work with, that may not be available in East Texas or in the Houston area. But work that plan according to the demographics of where you are, and understand that one size does not fit all. The next thing is make sure you educate everybody, especially the folks that are in leadership. And don't make it about just getting representation. This is huge. Don't make it about just getting representation. Don't make it about, well, we've got African-American now, so we're good. We've got a Hispanic, or we've got someone from the LGBTQ community. Don't make it about that. Make it about developing relationships and adding value to your chapter, bringing in folks that can give you a different perspective so you can move your chapter forward and move the sustainability in the area forward. Also, make sure that everybody understands the why. You gotta constantly communicate that. And that why may be different for certain people, but make sure everybody is attached to a why. And that why has to be beyond, this is the right thing to do. And don't make it a one and done thing. I want to pause on that, because a lot of organizations are guilty of, well, we've done this, so we make the effort, so we're done. Let's just go back to regular programming. You've heard that statement on TV, regular programming will resume shortly. No, don't need to go back and do what you've always done, because you're going to get what you've always got. Let's be dedicated to doing something different. All right, so, and some of you all have seen this before, but I'm going to share this with y'all. Some questions that you need to ask yourself within your chapters. So why is this important to our mission? You got to define that. How really inclusive are we today? What progress are we making? Are we doing anything? And what have we done that has given us the best results? Because there may be some things that you're doing that are actually bringing folks in. What are some of those things? Can we replicate that? Do we need to make some adjustments? So what should we stop doing? And that's a really good question. What are some of those things we should stop doing? So how is it going? How is this going to support our relationships internally and externally with this particular strategy? How is it going to bolster some of the things that we're trying to do, especially when we're trying to be more inclusive? What do we need help with? And this is something that's very important. And Mary Pearl, Michelle, and Kelly and I talked about this. What are some of the areas that people may need some additional help with? And you've got to be honest about that, because not everybody is good at everything. If you need some help with something, you need to recognize that and be willing to step forward and say, you know what, here's the area where we're struggling. Can we get some assistance with that? The other thing is you've got to have some measures. And it's not just, again, it's not just head count. Not just we've got one, we've got to. The measures has to tie back to how are we impacting the community? What are people saying about our organization now? Are we getting more likes on our website? On and on and on. There are a lot of other things that you need to measure and look at. As we go out into the community, do people know who we are? All of those things are things that you can look at and see, okay, this is a plus for us. So I kind of took this off the theme of be the change. It's kind of corny. Yes, I know it's kind of corny. But I just threw this out there and it says, bees do it. So here's the first one, be intentional. And I heard someone talk about, well, starting to do this and changing and stopping doing it. You've got to be intentional. Being inclusive is not necessarily an organic thing, even though I keep hearing folks say, well, the people are going to come. If you build it, it will come. Well, if you build it and you invite them and make sure that they appreciate it, then they'll come and they may even stay. But you've got to be intentional. The other thing you've got to be is persistent. Again, I said this earlier, it can't be a one and done strategy. You have to adjust your strategy. Again, don't marry it, just date it. Make some adjustments, but stay focused, keep moving forward. You got to be courageous also, because you're going to be uncomfortable in a lot of situations. That's one of the issues that a lot of folks face when they're trying to do this work, is discomfort, but don't let that sway you. Stay the course. You'll benefit in the long run. You also have to be humble. I heard someone talk about this earlier. Don't go in, I think it was Kelly that said, don't go in being the know-it-all, because you don't know it all. There's other folks that know some of that stuff too, plus some other things. So go in with an open mind, open thought, just being open to other ideas. Also be a good listener. And that's extremely important, because there's some things that people try to tell you sometimes that you may miss if you're thinking about what you're going to say next the whole time you're talking. So be a good listener. And the last thing I'll put on this B list, but there are some other things that we'll talk about later, is be authentic. Don't just do this as a check the box exercise. Be authentic. Make sure this is something that you're doing because you recognize the value of being inclusive within your agency and the value of what this inclusion will help with master naturalists do in the future. Again, and I've shared this before, if retention doesn't equal the amount of attention you're giving to recruitment, you're going to have a revolving door. You're going to have folks that are going to come in and say, you know what, this is not for me, and they're going to leave. So we've got to make sure once folks get in, they feel included. Very important. And with that, I'll entertain some questions from anyone.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it. There was some great discussion happening in the chat actually about
the last slide.
Yeah, about the last slide. Recruitment without retention is just a perpetual revolving door. Being intentional in your in the ways and the communication methods to our recruitments as well.
All right, and that's very important. And I see another one that says, does that indicate that we're attracting some of the wrong recruits too? Perhaps we, as an organization, aren't being clear about what people we're getting into, what people are getting into. That's possible. We have to be clear about the mission of Texas Master Naturalists as well. But there's still an opportunity to engage folks in there. Sometimes when they get engaged and they go, wow, this isn't what I thought it was. But because of the way that you're interacting with them, they still say, you know what, but this is a place I want to be. So that's where that inclusion piece comes in. Taking those ideas that, sometimes they may be a little different from what you would normally think, but examine it and at least let folks be heard, and then find out if this is something that we can do. How can it add value? Maybe it's an idea that may be able to attract some other folks that will come in and have a focus on what the Master Naturalists do. So don't discount anything. Anything else?
Great. Are there other questions for David?
Everyone has asked David if you would share your slides.
Sure. I will pass them on to YouTube. and you can do with them as you wish.
David, would you mind sharing your email in case we have other questions for you?
Sure.
Thank you so much.
david.buzz@tpwd.texas.gov.
Thank you so much.
Now, I did have a couple other things I want to throw it out there, and I don't know if Mary Pearl or Michelle were going to address this, but we were just talking the other day about getting started. If you haven't gotten started in identifying what your first project may be, writing that down.
You stole our next set of slides, David.
Yeah.
That exact question.
I didn't know. Okay. All right. I'm done.
No, go back to it. Yours are better.
Are you sure?
Yes, please show it.
Yeah, so what we were going to ask of the group to share is the first thing that they planned on taking back to their chapter from the workshop today. The first thing from this workshop. And you may have identified it better here, the first inclusion project.
And David, talk about that emotional priority, because we had a really deep discussion about that the other day.
Well, and it gets back to what I was sharing earlier, not doing the thing because you feel that it's the right thing to do, or because it goes back to a tie-in with something you saw on television, and you're doing it out of and we all have this emotional side. We all do. And anybody that denies they have no emotions, I don't know if I want to be around it, because you're kind of scared. But getting beyond that, tying it back to what's important to the mission of Texas Master Naturalists. How is what we're going to do, why is inclusion and diversity and so forth important to the mission of Texas Master Naturalists? And what are some of those things that can get folks engaged, so that what we're doing in this habitat that we so love is being sustained by everybody. It's being focused on by everybody. It's being supported by everybody, not just this is the cause of the day. Does that make sense?
Well, and then you further define that too. One of the things that that our chapters have access to now with these resources on the Google Doc and the Drive the Google Workshop folder that we've created too, is a way to write it down in a way that is translatable into those kind of SMART goal ideas. So creating a goal, a strategic action to meet those goals, and then the measures of success for them as well. And in those measures of success include that timeline and the metrics behind what a success looks like, or what a implementation strategy looks like, and who's involved, as you have on your slide, things like that. Great.
And people are dropping their answers to these questions in the chat, so that's great. Please continue to do so, or please feel free to come off mic and share live too.
Especially as we're wrapping up and getting close to the 1 o'clock hour. We can't say thank you enough for everybody for joining us today and staying involved and engaged and interactive on today's workshop. This has been a really fun experience for all of us. So we're excited to see what you guys are doing next.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. You want me to stop sharing now?
I'll grab it. Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right.
All right. So Michelle, you want to wrap us up and just ask that question one more time?
Sure. So first of all, thank you all for taking the time out of your Wednesday on such a beautiful day in April to be here with us for the workshop and being concerned about and committing to be the change efforts within your local chapter. We do ask that you continue to share with us, share in the chat, come off mic, and share with us the first thing that you'd like to take back to your chapter. And then along with that, who do you need to help? Who do you need to help you make that happen? So I'll give you just a minute or so to share that information in the chat. And then lastly, do you have any questions for us?
Excellent. If there are not any questions, y'all are free to go. And like Michelle said, get outside because it is beautiful, at least here in where I am in Central Texas. And yes, we'll definitely be sharing these resources. We'll send a follow-up email to all those that were registered with the recording and with those links to the folder once more if you haven't grabbed it out of the chat and copied it. Great. Michelle, I think I'm going to stop the recording and say thank you for everybody for joining us and have a fantastic week.
Thanks, everyone. And again,